Gress.
Good morning. Welcome to the December 7th, 2023 meeting of the Palo Alto Architecture Review Board. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chair Balte,
Present.
Vice Chair Rosenberg,
Present.
Board Member Adcock,
Present.
Board Member Chen,
Present.
Board Member Hirsch.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is public comment. Do we have any members of the public who wish to address us on any item not on our agenda today?
No, I have no raised hands or speaker cards.
Thank you. Next item is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. I have no changes. Staff, do we have any changes?
We do not have any agenda changes.
Thank you very much. Next item is city official reports. Staff, do we have any reports, please?
Sorry, are you on the SB9 item?
No, this is on just our boilerplate official reports regarding the schedule, future meetings, things like that. So I understand we've shifted our retreat from early January to end of February. Is that right?
Yes, my understanding is I think there was a movement afoot to put a retreat on the same day as the HRB meeting, which would exclude people like me because I am the HRB liaison. Not that that's why we changed it, but it's difficult to have two. I think we do need to have that on Zoom as well or recorded. So that's looking. I don't see it here, but I think the discussion was perhaps towards the end of February. I
think it was February 29th, if I recall.
Yeah. Oh, leap year. That's right.
So
it happens every 4 years. That was the discussion.
So our retreat will be on February 29th to my colleagues, so we know that.
In fact, that would be fun to put that in the bylaws every 4 years on leap year day.
Just every 4 years.
You need to have a retreat.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, is it recorded? I don't think so, but
What recorded?
that meeting as a meeting.
Yes, a retreat is a formal ARB meeting that's
It is?
recorded and staff, am I right on that? The ARB retreat meeting is a formal.
Yes,
public meeting.
retreats, generally we advertise in advance and put the potential topics to be covered. We have to talk about which topics are on the list. You don't have to cover them all, but definitely think about them all in advance and plan for discussing certain topics. And then the public is invited to speak under oral communications or whatever we call it for this agenda. And then the ARB has a chance to retreat in a public kind of a way.
I'm just recalling the last meeting that I recall is the one that we had at the Art Center. And
We did one there, yeah.
and I don't think it was recorded.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to talk to staff about that.
I believe the Art Center meeting that has been held over the years was about the ARB Design Awards and selecting those. I don't know if I haven't been involved as the liaison for a while. So my understanding is that we do have, we record every ARB meeting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention, Board Member Hirsch. We'll make sure that in the future, all ARB meetings, including the retreat, are properly recorded. That's fair enough. We do have our list of pending and coming in ARB projects, and we have a new one on the list I'd like to appoint an ad hoc subcommittee to. This is the fairly large project for 156 California Avenue that was recently in the news, and it's quite a big deal. And I'd like to appoint a subcommittee for that. Does anybody want to sort of be involved in that? It's at the very end on packet page 13. So it's an SB 330 application for something that's dramatically out of our current zoning standards. And I'd like to have the ARB just keeping an eye on how that's working its way through the system.
Can I
I'm
ask
up for that.
Can I ask a question about this first?
Sure.
Has it been through council for preliminary? approval.
Staff, can you answer that?
Hello, if you're talking about the 17-story project that has made the news, that came in without advanced notice to staff. It has not been to city council. It has just been submitted and discussed in the media.
Yes.
Okay, so I hear Board Member Adcock indicating interest in doing this, and I would like to be on it. So I'm going to appoint myself and Board Member Adcock as our subcommittee for the 156 California Avenue project. So let's make a note of that. There's nothing necessarily to do immediately, but I'd like to just have the ARB on record as to which two of us can be involved in that. Okay, next item is a study session. So we're going to go move into 70 Encina Avenue. Request for preliminary architecture review of a proposed project consisting of 10 new condominium townhouse units and a new 3-story, 22,230 square foot building and site improvements to replace the existing surface parking area. The formal application will include a rezoning to planned home zoning. So to my colleagues, this is a study session. There's no need for disclosures, but I'd offer anyone a chance who would like to make a disclosure. Board Member Adcock, do you have any disclosures you care to make? No? Board Member Chen?
Yeah, I visited the site.
Thank you. I disclosed that I visited the site as well.
I visited the site as well.
I visited the site.
Okay, so with that, can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, I'll go ahead and share my screen and begin the presentation. My name is Emily Callis. I am the project planner for 70 Encina, and this is the preliminary review study session. This project, again, preliminary review for a proposal to rezone the two community commercial zoned properties to planned home zoning PHZ in order to allow for 10 residential condominium units in a 3-story structure on the currently vacant property. Per the planned home zone requirements, there would be a net increase in housing with no jobs generated and at least 20% BMR units provided, which in this case would be 2 units. There was a council pre-screening in September of 2022. However, the project has been substantially redesigned since then. The site plan includes the 10 units arranged around a central driveway courtyard. Most of the units have 2 parking spaces, though there are 2 units that have 1 parking space. There is outdoor space provided in 2nd-story balconies as well as in kind of the side yard areas of the site. It's 3 stories tall and 38 feet 2 inches at the tallest points where 50 feet is allowed. In terms of the elevations, the bottom left is the front elevation, the 2 sides, and then the bottom right is the rear adjacent to Town and Country. The proposed materials include a brick veneer and glass block on the 1st floor with board and batten siding on the upper floors, as well as bronze and orange metal accents. Considerations for this morning's discussion include the relationship between the proposed project and its setting in the Town and Country parking lot, the site circulation, the usability of ground level open space and overall site landscaping, the architectural design, cohesiveness and quality of materials, and consideration of the context-based criteria and objective design criteria. Again, since this is a study session, there is no formal recommendation or motion. And I kept my presentation nice and brief this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So to my colleagues, I'd like to structure this today by having us with a round of questions of staff. If there's anything, then we'll have the applicant who's here, I believe, make a presentation to us, and again, questions, and then we'll provide feedback. Again, this is a study session, so we're not making a motion or taking action, but I think accurate feedback is really important here, and this is a tight project to fit in. So any questions of staff on this? Well, I'd like to start. Could you explain, please, this is taking what seems to be a bite out of the parking lot that's well used by Town and Country. How are they able to do that?
So the property is independently owned by the current property owners, which is not Ellis Partners, who own and operate Town and Country. And so they are within their rights to propose a project on this parcel.
And does that affect the Town and Country's parking compliance?
It is my understanding that Town and Country has a TDM plan and it will not impact their parking.
Okay, well, I understand that's not part of this review and it's certainly not on this applicant, but it seems to me something of community interest to understand what's going on. I'd like to know though, what about the adjacent properties on parking lots? Are those also privately owned? Could they be similarly redeveloped?
I believe that these are the only parcels that are owned by a separate party.
Okay, but does the current owner, if it's Ellis Partners from Town and Country, do they have the right to redevelop these parcels differently, assuming they can make the parking issues work?
A representative from Ellis Partners is here, so you can also potentially ask them that question.
I
but-
intend to, but I'd like a clear answer from the city. My understanding is that those partners are in a certain zoning district and they're entitled to develop them per the standards of that district. Is that right?
So we don't have Town and Country on the agenda today as a project. So it's not quite allowed to go talk about that site so much. But one should know that much of that site is within the half-mile radius of the train station. And so parking under AB 2097, the state law, is not required for uses other than hotels and event centers within that half-mile radius. So that's a change in state law. I'll just say that, and maybe we can move on to the project. And then
So
when
I'm
you,
really hoping, Amy, just to get a straight answer though, somebody could redevelop those properties from parking lots into other uses such as residential or commercial. Isn't that true?
every parcel can be, come in with an application to remodel. It's not a officially historic property, although it is well-maintained and has significance.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Board Member
Yeah.
Adcock,
Yeah,
Board
I
Member
just-
Chen, why don't you go first since you were
Okay.
about, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Board
Thank you.
Member Chen.
Yeah, so I saw there is a list of comments on packet page 17. So I want to know who make those and have these comments and questions delivered to the applicants before the meeting?
So those were essentially recommendations by staff for your discussion this morning.
So have these messages delivered to the applicant before they submit their package to this meeting? For all these comments, I think there are questions and concerns and comments. I think some of them are really good comments. So I want to know whether the applicants have heard what the concerns are from the staff and what's their response to that.
So when the staff report was published, we did send a copy to the applicant. But if you would like to ask any of these questions to the applicant directly, you would be able to do so. Yes, they were based on my review of the plans when they got submitted.
Board Member Adcock.
Yeah, I have a clarification question, kind of follow up from Peter's question about the ownership. So just that particular parcel is separately owned, and are all the other parking lots to the east and west owned by Town and Country? All of, there are a bunch of small parcels on either side. Is that correct?
Based on my discussion with Jody yesterday, yes.
Okay. And a follow-up on that is on A 0.3, that parcel is shown with the parcel we're talking about today, 70 Encina, is shown with the building layout on it, and the parcel just to the west of it appears to be a privately owned parcel as well. But when I go to A 1.01, that appears to be an existing driveway into Town and Country Shopping Center. So is that driveway privately owned by Town and Country as well?
Yes, so the driveway is located on a parcel. Sheet A 0.3 shows where the different parcels are. And it is correct that the one directly west of the subject site is the driveway entry.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, this parcel only has a street frontage on Encina, does not have any other drives. So as far as fire access and all of that is only on Encina, like the townhouse is being proposed on the backside. Like in terms of our consideration, all of that is like, a couple of 100 feet away from any public fire access.
The access to the site is on Encina, and the site should be, treated as an individual lot. And as it continues to go through the formal review process, for example, fire will be making sure that there is adequate access within the site rather than accessing it from any of the parking lot sides.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I clarify that? I think it's an excellent question. The service alley that's there now, which appears to be a public alley, is in fact a privately owned alley owned by Town and Country. And so that cannot be considered as a fire emergency access for the site. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Rosenberg.
Good morning, ladies. I just want to sort of back up here for a minute and start sort of basic. What is the existing lot zoned as?
Community commercial.
Community commercial. Are they looking to rezone the property to be allowed to build the residences? Or is that just simply allowed under a CC zone?
I believe mixed use is allowed, but I'll go ahead and double check that.
And while you're checking on that, I'll proceed forward. Did you have an answer yet?
Yes, it does not need to be rezoned to allow the residential use. It only needs to be rezoned to allow the floor area that is in excess of what would otherwise be allowed.
Okay. Do you know if at this time, and I understand if you don't have this answer ready, do you know if their floor area that they're requesting is meeting those compliance for the CC zoning of a residential development? And does it need to be mixed use or can it be solely residential?
Attachment B of the staff report compares what is being proposed to the
Oh, I'm good. Don't you worry.
base zoning.
Apologies, say again?
Attachment B is the zoning comparison table, which compares what is being proposed to what is required under the CC Community Commercial Zoning District. And so the places where it varies is the rear yard setback, which would typically be required to be 10 feet. The build to lines, which would typically be 50% of the frontage built to the front setback. The site coverage, which is about 7% over what would otherwise be allowed. And the floor area ratio, typically 0.5 would be allowed and 1.84 is being proposed.
Great. This table is incredibly helpful. Thank you. The follow-up question to this is, how are they going to be allowed to have these exemptions? What's the process that they're going to go through to be allowed to have no rear yard setback when we typically have 5?
So it is a fully discretionary process. I can pull up the process kind of flow chart for planned community projects, which this is.
Just add to it's discretionary and legislative. So because it's legislative, that is something that goes to council.
Mhm.
And, it's like creating its own zoning.
So basically, it's zoned for a specific use case. They're asking to develop it for residential, and then they're asking for a series of exceptions to the rules that would be required under residential development.
So the exceptions would be handled through that legislative
Process.
act, the PC. It's basically planned community
Sure.
in
so-
our
so-
zoning code.
But they're
So-
not guaranteed, right?
No, they're all
They're
part of
asking.
the ask
Perfect,
that
okay.
council planning commission would weigh in on and council would act upon.
Okay. And is there any requirement for, how do I put this, architectural deference to its surroundings, right? Neighborhood context, things like that, architectural context of its surroundings. It is notably next to Town and Country, which is low slung and very Mediterranean looking, and this is clearly not. So I'm wondering, is there anything in the requirements for development that asks for that sort of respect to its neighbors, architecturally speaking?
Well, when staff is looking at projects, even for legislative projects like a PC, we do look at other codes such as objective standards, this kind of thing. We've gone through that with this board, and thanks for your help on that. So we can look at those guidelines and compare the project to those guidelines, for instance, or standards. But again, in the end, it's a council decision on the particular project on this particular site.
Understood. Okay, I believe that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Board Member Hirsch, any questions?
At this point, I think everybody's been asking the appropriate questions regarding this particular
Okay,
project.
good. Well, let's keep moving along then. We're going to next have the applicant give us a presentation, and 2 members of the public after this, we will take comments from the public. I understand Ellis Partners is here to speak as well. We very much want to hear what you have to say as well. So good morning, Architect Galbraith. You'll have 10 minutes to speak. If you could be sure to state and spell your name for the record so our transcriber gets that straight. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Chair Balte, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Jeffrey Galbraith. Say again?
Please spell your
Spell
name.
that. Jeffrey, and my last name is Galbraith, Galbraith.
Thank you. Let's get started.
Okay, so we're excited to present this project to you in its newest form. The site has been introduced already. As you can see here, it's 2 parcels immediately behind the Town and Country shopping center. We've already discussed the zoning of the parcel. It's surrounded by CC and CS commercial projects and properties. It's well outside of the radius of any other residential project itself, so the impacts of that doesn't come into play here as it does on other sites. The uses surrounding the parcel, basically all the properties that are on the north side of Encina are all medical and professional office and support uses on that block. A little bit of change as you move towards the west. As has been noted in your questions, there's parking as well as a rear vehicular ingress and egress for Town and Country on both sides. And then the southern edge is flanked by the service alley behind the shopping center. In terms of architectural context, there's quite a mix of building styles. You've got the 5-story Opportunity Center to the west. Most of the other projects immediately across the street are 1 and 2 stories. Again, a very eclectic mix of material uses and building forms and so forth. No real overarching style or context on the northern side of the street. Of course, Town and Country There's a very large anchor to the south of the project, and there's a lot of consistency there, primarily single story with some second two-story portions, predominantly dark painted materials with clay tile roofs and expansive coverings, overhangs in front of all the storefronts. And so we have these four very distinct edges, right? Edge number one on the street, the sort of typical facade. Edge number two, which is sort of a secondary facade because you'll see it a lot, pass by it as you move down that vehicular ingress and egress. Edge three, very much more of a service side, and four, just basic parking. And so a little over a year ago, we brought a pre-screening presentation to council. At that time, it was a 5-story project, 4 stories of units over a story of podium, parking, and utility uses. That project had 20 condo units. And while it received pretty warm reception from council, there was a general feeling that housing was appropriate here for a lot of reasons. Town and Country took a lot of exceptions, primarily to the size and in some cases to the use of materials. And we left that meeting with a objective to work together with them and see if we can find some compromises to pare the building down and make it work for both parties. Our first efforts looked at paring back, pushing the rear facade back a little bit and carving out a couple of units from the top story to bring the mass down and to change the character of the back facade to be more open with extensive coverings similar to Town and Country. That was not felt to be enough of a change to them. And so, despite the fact that the massing changes put it within an envelope that would be more typical if there were a daylight plane required for the project. So our initial concept of 5 stories, 20 units wasn't working. Paring it down a little bit wasn't working. And so we really had to look at, okay, how can we get to where they would like us to go? Can we get to a 3-story project? And we studied a number of plans that still maintain a podium concept with units on top. We were able to get to 15 units and a couple of different plan concepts that looked at shifting parts and pieces around, and we worked with contractors to get some pricing. And unfortunately, no matter how we sliced those projects, the numbers just didn't work. The costs, a lot of it in the podium construction, were just too much to be borne by the finances of the project. And so we had to really step back and think about, okay, is there a 3-story project that can work? How do we get the construction costs down to a point where the project is viable? And the only concept that we could find that would work for that is to change to a 3-story townhome concept where we get rid of the concrete construction of the podium, we go all wood construction. Each of these units basically become sort of a vertical stack where shear walls can be continuous to grade. And so each unit now has its own internalized garage and is more of kind of a typical townhome project. And so when we take that concept and we overlay it on the site is 100 feet wide and it's 120 feet deep. And so you start, first of all, with a 30-foot wide access aisle down the middle, which you kind of have to be at least that big so you can have 2 cars pass each other. You've got enough room for people to safely back out of their garages and not be encroaching into front door entry spaces. The central courtyard does become not just the vehicular entry, but also the pedestrian entry. So everyone's front doors are on this central courtyard space. It becomes sort of a main street of the development itself. And so when you size the unit footprint to get a 2-car garage, you've got about 26'6" width. You can get about 6 of those to fit within the site. And then you don't have quite enough room to do the same thing on the corner units. We're able to get tandem parking to work in the rear too, but reduced down to a 1-car garage in the front. And the gray areas in the corners are shared spaces like trash rooms and electrical utilities and so forth. So we have 3 unit plans, basically A, B, and C. Those essentially just extrude vertically with a little bit of adjustment in the exterior facade to capture a little bit more space over the drive aisle to make up for the smaller footprint of those corner units and allow them to be 3 bedrooms as well. And so the yield of this new concept is half of the original. 10 condo units, mostly 3 bedrooms, and again, 20% of them would be affordable. So we did a number of material studies at first looking at a similar palette to the previous proposal, sort of a lighter toned and woods, and now introducing some board and batten siding, which is a material used at Town and Country. We also looked at another concept that wrapped the building in more of a rectilinear sort of unifying facade, but we didn't feel like that was as successful in terms of relating to the Town and Country vernacular. So we shifted back to sort of a modification of the original approach here, where we opted for a darker palette, which is much more in line with the Town and Country material palette. You see the board and batten siding there, the use of shed roofs, and maintaining the sort of light buff brick base at the ground floor. I'll jump through the plans quickly. I think we've covered most of the high points there. We can come back if need be. But again, 3 unit types, mostly 3 bedroom. And so we'll wrap up just by going through a few renderings. There's a few more here than you had in your packet. So this is the front facade. Coming in a little bit closer, you can see the materials a little bit better here, the long Norman or Roman brick at the base. The sidewalk in this area is only 6 feet wide. And so we've taken the ground floor and shifted it back 3 feet to make some room for planting along that edge and to create a little bit of a buffer space there. The entry gate there in the middle is as open as we can make it for visual access into the central courtyard to be inviting. And you can see there the terraces for those front 2 units up on the 2nd floor, which again help with the sense of openness of the facade. And the mix of different sort of fiber cement panel execution on the upper levels. This is a view from Encina, looking back at the corner of the building. Now coming around and looking at that facade, it's sort of that secondary facade, right, that flanks the entryway, the vehicular entry into the back of Town and Country. What you notice here, which wasn't on the other elevations, is as we developed the design, we added this trellis structure on both sides, as well as a rock wall fence to help with the scale, as well as make those spaces themselves a lot more usable and enjoyable, and add an element that speaks back again to the language of Town and Country with the exposed beams and post structure. So coming back around to the front and coming into the courtyard is really a key space to making this project work, right? It's a very unique context, and it really needs an internalized space, both for to create this kind of Main Street feel. Everyone has a 2nd story terrace, right, that looks out over the space, and it allows the building mass to help shroud the occupants from the uses that are around it. And we think we're very happy with the way it's turned out. A huge precedent for us for this project was a project in San Francisco by Dan Solomon, probably 20, 30 years ago, called Fulton Grove. And it's really a successful space to this day. I see that I'm out of time. I'll just run quickly through these images. You can see here the trellises around the side yard spaces here. And lastly, an image looking back from the northeast. We'll look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. To my colleagues, any questions of the applicant? Board Member Hirsch, do you have anything to ask? I see your light is on. Sorry about that. Board Member Adcock? Not right away. Anyone else? Go ahead, Board Member Rosenberg.
Thank you for the presentation, very informative. The addition of the trellises and the rock walls, clarification, just so I understand it better, is it going to be a rock wall or a Gabion style wall?
What's depicted here is basically 2 layers of woven metal mesh with rock in between. So it's kind of like a Gabion.
Perfect, okay. And I did notice the uneven edging. Was that intentional, or is that?
Just the way the rock would fill in at the top, potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the trellises is the intention to really match the Town and Country woodwork that's going on there? So it'd be similar color? Is it similar sizing? Clarify that a little bit more.
The question of compatible, and our mind is never trying to match something exactly, right?
Yeah.
Trying to copy it.
Right.
I think there is one of the hallmarks of the town and country language is this rhythm of post and beam and exposed structure and the dark color. And what we propose picks up on all those cues.
So, and just clarification, your 20% for the below market rate, the BMR units, that's going to equal 2.
Correct.
That's all I had for right now. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Board Member Adcock.
Thank you. Do you have a few questions? Thank you for your presentation. Based on what you shared, the additional renderings versus the plans on our set, the plans are pretty much the same. Is that correct?
Correct.
So my first question is about your first vehicular entry from Encina, which is shown as a 14-foot wide gate and pedestrian door gates on either side. 14 feet seems a little narrow for two-way traffic for cars. And additionally, based on my previous question about fire access, is it expected that, emergency vehicles would come into the courtyard for the back, in which case you need based on the height of your buildings, I think you need the 26-foot wide with the 13.6 aerial access clearance. Is that not the case?
Yeah, the project is small enough that it isn't. The fire department would not be expected to bring their engines inside. That would need a much higher entry portal for that.
Isn't that 3 foot?
Say again?
3-story and 30 feet eve height is what pushes you to the aerial access, correct? Which you are already taller than.
So we have had meetings with the fire department on previous iterations. There will be more discussion that has to happen with that. The way that the plan is configured is the majority of the bedrooms are all configured around, I'll just jump back here in the presentation, are all actually located on the courtyard side. And so fire access, if I jump up to the second floor, you kind of see here that in the core units, the master suite and the bedroom are both on the courtyard side, and the front units all face Encina. And so they can get ladder access up to the 3rd floor just from the ground and don't need a hook and ladder truck in order to get up to the 3rd floor. So they would be actually coming in and doing rescue from bedrooms through the courtyard. Without the need to bring their vehicles in. Of course, there's a long ways to go with working out all the logistics, but that's the concept. And to your question earlier, just about the width of the ingress. So once you're inside of the courtyard, it's 30 feet wide wall to wall.
Right.
So there's enough room for 2 cars to pass each other with some buffer on the side. The city has a published document that lists the required width of the ingress ways, and it's based on the number of units. And the 14 feet is allowable for up to 10 units.
Okay, thank you. Another second small question is looks like instead of the fence that was indicated in the drawings, that's the rock wall that you're proposing, correct? On the
Correct.
side. So behind that, you have the small patio area for each unit. And you're showing gates between units. Is that a requirement? Or like what's the logic for making people go between units?
It's our assumption at this time, and again, this has to be worked out further with the fire department, but that there are 2 bedrooms all the way in the back that can't be accessed from the central courtyard. So our assumption is that the fire department personnel would need to be able to come down those side yards to get to the rear units. And that's why there's gates there at this point. So they're not the front doors to the units, they're back doors. But I understand the question.
Yeah. And one last question is the planting areas that you're showing. Well, first on the very first floor at the notches, if you go to your floor plan, I'm looking at A2.01. Yes, actually, no, this sheet is fine. On both the bottom right and bottom left, kind of right behind your rock wall, there's a little green patch.
Right.
Is that being planted? How is that being maintained, especially knowing that it's landlocked by other people's property?
At this point, as an early sort of preliminary ARB, I'm not going to tell you we've got everything totally worked out yet. We're looking for your feedback on what we have to share today, and we've got a little ways to go.
Okay. And same thing on the upper floor too. You have planting areas that are outside kitchen windows that are beyond accessible. Right. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Adcock. I'd like to look a little bit deeper with you, if I could. Why did you not choose to put underground parking instead of keeping it? All your proposals throughout this project have always maintained
Yeah.
at-grade parking.
I mean, it's all about cost. I mean, as soon as you put underground parking, you've got to get down there. So you lose a huge chunk of the site just in ramping down. And you've got the costs of the basement parking itself. It kills the project right from the outset.
Did you actually study that as an option at some point?
We did.
Okay. And then could you clarify again, your decision to go from, originally your proposal was 5 stories, 20 condo units, more as an apartment building. And you even tried paring that back some, stepping it. And now you're at 3 stories in townhouses. What was the rationale for going between those two designs? This is radically different.
Yeah, completely cost driven. I mean, you take enough out of the previous concept and it just doesn't, the numbers don't work anymore. You've got to find a way to get the construction costs to come down enough to make the project feasible, right? The land costs don't change. Soft costs, a lot of other costs don't change. There's still massive costs for utilities and infrastructure and city fees. It's a tough equation to make work. You've seen a lot of projects be presented in this town in the last few years, and many of them didn't advance past the initial stages, and it's a tough nut to crack.
So this is hypothetical, but if you had a 4-story condo type building, maybe 15 units, do you think that would pencil out?
The problem with getting to 4-story like condos of this style is that, there's a limit to how many stairs people want to go up and down, right, within the unit.
Well, I'm saying go back towards your
if you go back
original
to the
design
podium
ideas.
with 4 stories.
Yeah.
I don't know. My gut feeling is no, just based on the numbers that we've studied so far.
Okay, thank you for your honest answer on that. Any other questions?
Yeah,
You have questions?
yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah, I
Board
do have
Member
a couple of minor questions. One question on the functional side. So for the package delivery room and the trash room, what's the sort of, how will the tenant use that? Will they come from the front door and go through the gate and then go to both of the rooms?
I think that would probably be the typical strategy is people would come out their front doors through the central courtyard and around to the trash room. I mean, hypothetically, you could use your rear yard, but then you'd be crossing through your neighbor's yard to get there. And there needs to be some thought about how that works into the sort of bylaws of the development, right?
And another question about the upper floor windows, the bedroom and living room windows that currently is basically facing each other directly. Have you ever thought about offset all those windows?
Yeah, it was a key concern. And what we determined was that you can see here that at the living room level, we've moved the windows off to the corners. You typically don't occupy the corner yourself. You typically are more in the center of the room. And so you wouldn't have a direct view right across, right into someone else's living room. And similar logic on the upper master suite as well, pushing the windows to the corners. The bedrooms, we could certainly flip which side of those the glass goes on if we felt like there was a benefit there. So that's a good comment. Thanks.
Any further questions? Board Member Hirsch, go ahead.
Yeah. So what you have shown for is a reduced kind of area where the single units that are at the front have to maneuver their car in order to get it into their garage space. Have you really explored all of that? Because it's a much tighter space. And of course, they're interrupting the rest of the traffic while they back up and readjust their.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. The project that I mentioned in San Francisco, Fulton Grove, again, is a great example. It's very, very similar. You've got a 30-foot wide courtyard, and you've got the 2 units right at the front with the units there. It's negotiable. It can be done, and I'm sure as part of the project, we'll be asked to provide vehicular turning radius studies and things that show that that's feasible.
Had you given some thought to a garage that would be off the street? Is that a code problem?
You mean having garage doors that?
For
that are
those two
accessed
units
through-
in particular, yeah.
Typically, we are not allowed to have more than one curb cut into a project. And so once you take that curb cut up with the central drive aisle, now we'd basically be asking for the whole street frontage to be curb cuts, right? To get the central drive aisle and then additional ones for those two units. I saw that as a non-starter, but if the city's open to it, we're open to looking at it.
Yeah, those are two, you're showing this, you've made some changes here to the areas that are the outside sort of use space on the ground where you are actually coming through a garage to use a space outside of the garage, and you indicate on there that there'd be some table or use of the space, and how do you relate that to the program, which is really basically upstairs?
Yeah, how people will use those spaces, I'm sure everybody's going to have their own idea. One person might put their trash bins back there. One person might put a little play yard, right, for their kids. I think it's up to each occupant how they value that space. But they have it, right?
Okay, that's all my questions at the moment.
Board Member Rosenberg, you had a question?
Yeah, I just want to, Board Member Chen and Board Member Hirsch asked two of them. One was about trash and one was about that front unit. I got some serious concerns about the parking. Maybe those need to be flip-flopped and explored a little more. But that's, again, I understand we're not fully developed at this stage. My final question is really in regards to these last two units that are really right on the setback in both sides, right? They're on the drive aisle of that service alley and they're on the parking lots to both extents. From my understanding, residential setbacks are typically 10 feet. So Amy, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, Emily. And you guys are opting for 0, right? Nothing. So in case of any future development, your building will be sharing a party wall or really almost touching some neighbor's development. Could you explain that a little bit more?
It's really not that uncommon in urban areas, right, to have residential buildings that butt right up to property lines. Obviously, the more yard you can carve out, the more space you can potentially use. But the rear yard area, I mean, it fronts a service alley, right? It's basically back doors and bollards and trash bins. And it's not a space that if we pull the building back, it's not a space that will be used by occupants. The space is much better utilized by pushing those units to the edge and pushing that space into the core where it can actually be used and enjoyed by the occupants. I don't think there's anything lost to the service alley with that move, and there's only things gained to the occupants of the project.
So another question I would have is in regards to your cost calculations, having these two final units be tandem unit spaces versus something that's more similar to those front unit spaces, is that a deal killer?
If it was, we wouldn't be here.
Say again?
If it was, we wouldn't be presenting it.
Okay, thank you.
I'd come back with one question.
Go ahead.
Sort of, this overlaps with Commissioner Chen's comments that the access to, in thinking about how you're using the front of the building there, if the parking were moved, then you'd have better access to the other use spaces of the front of the building. That is, the garbage could be reached from the inside courtyard. The package room could be reached from the inside courtyard. So it changes the planning.
Yeah, true.
Okay, it just one.
Yeah, interesting thought. Thank you.
Okay, before we go to public comment, I'm going to give you one final softball question to tee them up. What about this design makes you feel it's compatible architecturally with Town and Country?
Well, I mean, the compatibility comes in the use of materials and the vernacular. I mean, look, you can imagine all kinds of different projects that you would look at and say they're absolutely not compatible, right? A large glass sided office building is going to look way out of place. A really sort of Spanish colonial style project is not going to look right next to it. Yeah, Town and Country has a unique style of its own. I think if anybody takes the position that you have to be one story in order to work with it, then I disagree, and I think that leads to no project. I think the use of materials, the use of simple building forms, the shed roofs, the trellises we've added along the edges, I think it's very compatible.
Okay, thanks. Okay, no further questions. And we're going to open the meeting to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who wish to address us?
Yes, one from Dean Robinson.
Good morning, and thank you for making the time to come speak with us. You will have 3 minutes. If you could please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you very much. I will do my best to keep it to 3 minutes. My name is Dean Rubinson, DeanRubinson.
Thank you.
I've been the Director of Development for Ellis Partners in Town and Country Village since 2005. I've been managing the renovations and tenant improvements at the property for the last 18 years, and I'm happy to have seen this property evolve into the treasured community gathering place that it is today. I first want to clarify that Ellis Partners is very supportive of new housing in Palo Alto and the Bay Area. With that said, we strongly believe that the proposed project as currently designed threatens to permanently degrade Town and Country Village due to its disregard for the contextual urban planning and lack of consideration to the impacts on vehicles, pedestrians, parking, and other operational elements. This developer is asking you to change long-established zoning and density rules for them. They have acquired an isolated quarter acre in the middle of a parking lot that has served our center for 70 years and is looking to maximize their profits by cramming 10 3-bedroom luxury townhomes onto it, regardless of the short and long-term impacts that it creates on this unique and historic community gathering place. While the PHC process might allow for the council to waive many responsible planning and zoning considerations, we believe that it is the role of this board to guide the developer such that the project meets the intent of those regulations that have been successfully applied by this board to hundreds of other projects throughout Palo Alto. Our preference would be that the character of Town and Country Village is not eroded for the creation of 10 luxury condos. But if this project is to proceed, we ask you to carefully consider the following. The proposed project does not integrate into the existing historic character or scale of Town and Country Village and should seek to further be compatible with its design, massing, and use of materials. We see this concern highlighted. We highlight this concern in addition to prohibiting housing. The comprehensive plan, which prohibits housing, specifically states that the future development at this site should preserve its existing amenities, pedestrian scale, and architectural character. The design also does not enhance the living conditions on the site, as indicated in the design guidelines of Palo Alto. The intensive operational needs of a thriving neighborhood center include early morning deliveries and trash off-haul, late night, evening janitorial work, customers leaving our restaurants who need brightly lit customer parking for safety. Given the density of the proposed development, we foresee endless complaints and conflicts resulting from this incompatible design. The current proposal has the property fully developed from lot line to lot line, leaving no room for the required landscaping or buffers. In addition, the proposal only replaces about 25% of the existing tree canopy. We have no intention for development in this area, so this project will exist in isolation and without transition other than what it creates. The current proposal, which includes 30 bedrooms and only 18 parking spaces, allows for inadequate parking spaces for its residents, let alone its visitors, vendors, and deliveries. With Encina already fully parked during the day and our stalls restricted for our customers and tenants, we feel that added residents and vehicles will likely create an unmanageable parking situation in this already busy location. We're concerned that we will end up with a burden of enforcement and ultimately obligated to tow improperly parked vehicles that are parked on our site for decades to come. Thank you. I've got one more sentence here. Until the proposal can achieve mitigation with these existing necessary constraints, the application should be returned for modification. We encourage you to respond to this application in a manner that aligns with the City Council's direction to 1, achieve Town and Country support, 2, limit conflict with the comprehensive plan, 3, align fully with the intent of the PHZ and PC process, and lastly, achieve complete and defensible alignment with the required architectural findings for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to address us?
No, just the one.
Okay, so with that, we'll close the meeting to public comment. To the applicant, we'll offer you a chance to counter what was just said if you'd like. You don't have to, but we're legally required to offer you that opportunity. No, okay, so then we'll bring this back to the board for discussion. So before we get started on that though, and this is rather unorthodox, but we've asked questions of both the applicant and staff, and Ellis Partners is the manager and owner of Town and Country. The city council's overriding concern when they reviewed this initially, in my opinion, was the well-being of Town and Country Shopping Center. They felt that it was really paramount that this project, whatever size it ends up being, not negatively impact the shopping center. With that, I'd like to offer the board a chance to ask questions of the Ellis Partners, if there's anyone has, since they're here.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the question, how did,
If you could come back to the microphone, please.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a strange situation here that how did it happen? How did it happen that this little chunk of land that really seems like it belongs to your rest of your facility there, how did this get separated out?
Happy to have the opportunity to explain. We ground leased the entire Town and Country facility from the Williams Foundation, the original developers from the 1950s, with a 70, 80-year term. So we don't own the land under any part of Town and Country.
Oh, no.
It's a very long ground lease, and that's why we've continued to develop it and improve it. This 2-parcel piece is owned by a separate entity, and we've been leasing it annually since 2005 as a parking lot, and offered to purchase it from them to continue it as a parking lot. But the developer offered somewhat higher than we did. And in terms of the ability that you asked for earlier of us to develop the rest of the site, we could certainly develop additional housing along the site if we went through a similar PHC process, but we feel that Town and Country is a special, unique location. And there is actually a specific section in the comprehensive plan that asks us to preserve it in its current form and not to add residential there. It's one of the only properties in town that has a specific section in the comp plan to maintain it in its current form and character and scale, and to not put housing there. When I was hired in 2005, I read those words and adhered to them every single day since 2005. The effort here to put 10 units here throws out all of those requirements and all of the rules and mantra that we've been asked by the city. I've been working with Amy since 2005 on this project, and we've adhered to what the city and the residents have asked us to do to maintain Town and Country with its unique charm. Therefore, even in the remaining parcels behind the buildings, we don't think it's appropriate for us to develop properties, residential there, or even other projects of a larger scale, because we think it downgrades the overall experience and nature of Town and Country Village.
To add to that, the question there, would you ever intend to, I mean, I know you're using most of that space as parking for, and maybe you could describe what that parking is, because it's a little different than, it seems to me, than the rest of the parking of the facility there. But besides that, have you ever thought about expansion of Town and Country, or is it pretty much acceptable to you to keep it exactly what it is?
Like I said, we've really adhered to what the comp plan said, and it doesn't allow residential, and it doesn't encourage density beyond the scale that's there now. We have looked at different times to see if it would be feasible. For us, we would have to replace the existing retail parking that's there if we wanted to put other uses, and would therefore have to go underground or much higher, neither of which we believe would be financially feasible. But I think our initial feeling of doing what the city asked for and what the community asked for has really driven our thinking, and we like the Town and Country just the way it is. It's a very complicated organism. It has come and gone in terms of its successes, and we feel like we're on a great run now, and these things can be ruined by overdevelopment or adding what we see in our architects' words as spaceship planning here, of dropping something that came out of nowhere that shouldn't be there. And, you know, we respect the Hayes group. We've worked with them in the past. We appreciate their willingness to lower the scale. And we certainly understand the city's goal to put housing, but I believe there are 6,000 other housing sites identified within the housing element. And to have 10 of those 6,000 sites run the risk of degrading this community treasure, we feel is inappropriate. So,
Thank you very much.
We want to keep it to questions. Does anyone else have any questions?
I do.
Okay, Board Member Adcock, go ahead.
One, I have, I think, two questions. One is, you mentioned that, the current, the community development plan basically prohibits housing in this, and maintain existing amenities. While, Town and Country is, especially, is a special section in the whole policy, zoning and everything. Can you explain, as a private owner, that's not you guys for that lot, is there anything that makes it so the city could not approve housing in this, that you mentioned it prohibits housing? Can you explain that further?
my understanding is that the comp plan, which is essentially the general plan,
Yeah.
says that housing is not permitted. I think I have a quote here. It says that conversion to residential capacity should not be considered a town and country village. In addition, I believe that the zoning allows only for mixed use residential, and it has to have a certain amount of office as a component of that mixed use. It doesn't allow within the zoning, and the density, I believe, is 0.15 FAR. So does that sound correct?
Let's staff confirm
Through the
that if we
chair,
could, please.
I was going to remark that the zoning code for this zone that Town and Country is zoned and this site is only permitted to have residential as part of a mixed-use development. It's true. Or on sites designated as housing inventory sites in the housing element, which this site has been cited as a capacity of 4 units. Emily may want to, she did include that in her report.
Yeah, so out of the 2 sites, one of them is designated as a housing inventory site in the housing element. It was considered to have a realistic capacity of 4 units that was likely based on the zoning allowance for 1.25 FAR for potential residential development. And as a housing inventory site, it's also allowed to be 100% residential. However, since this project site is composed of 2 lots, and the second one is not designated as a housing inventory site, I'm not actually sure how that would affect if mixed use would be required.
Okay, thanks for that. I just want to be clear, it's not the applicant telling us what the code is, but our staff. Okay, continue with your question.
The other question is relatively minor, but you had noted that, this development would add vehicles to the site, which, it's got, I think, 18 parking spaces, but it's replacing more parking spaces than this property currently has right now, if I'm counting it correctly. So my question on that is this lot, as being leased by Town and Country, is the parking, on an average day, 100% used? And are there 18 cars parked here now and it's being replaced by 18 cars of residents? Or do you really believe that having those units will increase vehicular traffic to this area?
So we have, basically, when this site no longer became leased to us about 2 years ago, the applicant or the owner put up a fence around the 42 stalls that were there. We had worked with the city the day after that to say that we had more than enough parking. We didn't need those 42 spaces to meet our parking requirements. The fence has been up there, I believe, without any kind of zoning allowance. It's been subject to zoning violations for the last 2 years, I believe, that have not been enforced. Nonetheless, the parking that we're talking about of concern is not for our use. We're okay without this property, but if they have 10 3-bedrooms plus visitors, that's potentially 30 occupants, visitors, maintenance people. Where on those 18 stalls are all of those 30 plus people going to park? Because Encina is filled with people who work at PAMF. So we're worried that the logical place for them to go is going to be on our property. The logical place for their service vehicles to go is on our property. In fact, when they did their geotechnical work and their survey work, they parked on our property and accessed it through our driveway because they don't have a survey. They don't have
If you could
a
please
curb cut. So,
limit your response to the question, otherwise
okay,
it's totally unfair to the applicant. We're trying to keep a balanced hearing, but
Very good.
I understand
I
you have a lot of interest in this.
focused on parking and the concern we have that it will roll over. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Any other questions of staff? He just made a comment regarding the fencing. Do you want to counter or add to what they just said, or should we just let that go?
We don't have information ready about code enforcement about the fence.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you for
Thank you
your
very
time. To the applicant once more, do you care to add to this conversation now that we've been going on so long with Ellis Partners? I just want to keep this balanced and try to get as much information as possible.
Yeah, I
Everyone,
appreciate that.
This is a study session. We're being informal, trying to get everybody to have a say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
appreciate the opportunity. I think the only thing I would offer is just a little bit of clarity around the section of the comp plan that's referenced. The comprehensive plan has a lot of different kinds of information in it. It has policies in it. It has things it calls programs. The section that's quoted in the letter is from program L 2.4.4. And there's a big table of programs. These are, the word program can be a little misleading. A lot of them are efforts by the city, things that the city is going to study to give itself information and perspective. In that table, it lists the priority of these different efforts, as well as the anticipated kind of staff cost of how much is it going to cost us to evaluate this piece. And so program L 2.4.4, the summary is very, very short. I can just read it. And the first sentence, I think, does a good job of laying out what the intent is. It says, assess non-residential development potential in community commercial, service commercial, downtown commercial districts, and neighborhood commercial district. Okay, so the key objective is to figure out how much basically office development can happen under our current zoning in our downtown areas, right? As you know, the development of office space in the city has been a key topic for a long time. All the impacts and traffic and so forth that has. And so this effort by the city, this program was to assess, all right, how much can be developed in our downtown? And secondarily, the sentence goes on to say, and convert non-retail commercial, basically office, and convert office FAR to residential FAR. All right, so this is the city saying we need to do a study. We need to figure out how much commercial can be built in the downtown and what are some ways that we can instead incentivize residential in those areas instead of commercial. And then there's a tack-on sentence at the end that says, and this is the piece that was quoted, that says conversion to residential capacity should not be considered in town and country village. Right? And so it's carving town and country out of this study effort. When you look at the zoning map, town and country is a good size CC and CS chunk, right, of the plan. So it's saying we're doing the study in these areas and leave the town and country out of that question. So I think it's a misapplication of the section. It's also not a policy, right? There's no zoning language or policy or text amendment that came out of that said, thou shalt not build housing in the town and country CC zone. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and such. So we'll bring this back to the board for discussion. So to my colleagues, much of what we've been talking about has to do with planning, with parking, with large-scale development in Palo Alto. Little of that is really the direct purview of the ARB. While I think we should discuss all these things as we feel fit, I think we should be careful to focus on the design of the building as well. Is it appropriate? Is it compatible? So with that caveat, Board Member Adcock, why don't you start us off?
So very specific to the design that's being presented. I do believe the development with the colors and the material is much more compatible than what was previously presented, and does sit as a backdrop to Town and Country Village. My concern, and this is again back to kind of zoning and planning, is the property being right up to the edge. And particularly on the last unit that was that has the bedrooms that the alleyways needs access to. I'm looking at the plans and I don't understand how fire access would still be maintained with a firefighter comes or emergency responder comes down that alley. And then there's a little roof over the garage that then goes up to, so I think it's more of like having that last unit go right up to the property kind of goes against that, at least in my opinion, that access to the back. The bedrooms on the third floor of that last two units. But the material and the colors, I think they're kind of toned down enough that I think sits as a backdrop and not as a competitor to Town and Country, if that's the right word. But overall, I think the steps you've taken to reduce this to scale and obviously cost is a big factor, I think is commendable. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Board Member Hirsch, you've been less than your usual gregarious self today. Want to bring us along?
Try not to take too much time, but while I agree with the last comments, it seems that some of the design has been altered somehow to create a canopy that would in some way represent similar to what is at the Town and Country. It's kind of an add-on to what you have, and especially it's not really a functional space, so it's really just for perimeter aesthetics that you put the canopies around the outside of the building. You really can't look at this project without sort of seeing it in its context. And I'm sorry, but we really can't talk about this project as, I don't think, as an individual standalone project. It seems rather obvious. The scheme is really quite interesting. The original kind of Solomon scheme is a terrific scheme that you can imagine that courtyard be a terrific courtyard. Kind of sorry, my phone is ringing. I have to take a break. I got to talk later in a meeting. The courtyard is a great scheme. I mean, it's a wonderful kind of place where one can imagine the life of that community is going to be every day with the kids playing in the courtyard. So the scheme itself is a good scheme, but the element is completely out of place here. If it were surrounded by the next three of the rest of the area of that parking lot also in a similar manner, then it would have some reason. And it would provide some real housing for the community as well. But that's not what's being offered here. So it's a standalone, like dropped in as mentioned from the sky. So I don't see us providing comments on the design as being the significant discussion here, because it's an element that's really out of place and shouldn't be accepted for what it does to the center as the shopping center entirely. So I'm going to stop it there, but except for the fact that if it ever does go forward, I find the parking is not working for the first two units. The access to garbage and package rooms don't work as well as they would if they were facing into the courtyard. There's the possibility, I believe, of using the PC zoning here to allow for additional access from the outside for two of the parking spaces, as I mentioned, from the perimeter so that you could improve the functionality of the inside. With that, I mean, I accept the images of the facades of the buildings, they're fine, but I don't believe this building should be built.
I'm sorry, Dave, your very last comment was you don't believe this building should be built?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to be sure I understood that. Okay, Board Member Chen.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. Let us know the entire process and the history about the design. And if just focus on the building itself, I think there are some functional issues here. For example, and also fire concerns, as Board Member Adcock mentioned several times. And also, like for the gate, the width of the gate is, you mentioned the code allows 14 feet wide, but code requirement is just the minimum requirement. When you think about how it functions, like 10 units people living here in the morning when they go to work or drop off their kids to school, it's a challenge for everybody just waiting at the 14 feet wide gate. So I think there are some functional issues need to be solved. I know it's quite challenged to develop 10 units in this small unit. And also the functional issues, including the package location and the trash room location. It seems like it's lots of work for whoever live there to bring their trash or to where it is located at. And also for the materials, yeah, it is a better selection considering it as the backdrop of the Talents Country village. However, I think it is the current materials, it is kind of too dark and also too harsh on the pedestrian level. I would suggest to you to reconsider some different materials, especially at the street level instead of brick. Because when you look at the renderings on sheet A 3.04, the courtyard view, it seems like it's just cold and dark considering the orientation of the building. There would be very limited natural light in this courtyard. Most of them are just in the shadow most of the time, and the dark material will make the courtyard look even darker. So I would suggest you to reconsider some of the material selections. As far as the floor plans, I would suggest you to consider offset all those windows, especially on the third level, the bedrooms facing each other. Maybe the simple solution is just flip one of the side of the unit so that it's not facing directly, say the master suite facing the bedroom, and it just mirrored. And also the master suite facing Encina Street, it seems it's quite tiny. It's only 10 feet wide, include the wall thickness. So maybe there are some improvements for the unit floor plan. And that's all my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Chen. Board Member Rosenberg.
Thank you. This is a very unique project, so you'll hear a lot of varied opinions on this as we're all sort of processing through this. This isn't your cookie cutter stamp and go project. On a personal note, I grew up in Palo Alto. I spent many hours at Town and Country Village as a kid during high school, a lot of time at the cheese shop. And it's a very unique site that I do think needs to be preserved and respected. Now, that being said, this back parking lot is something that I was practically unaware of its existence for many years, because as someone who walked to the Town and Country Village, this back parking area was not something I used. Now, we are a car dependent society and we do need parking, but we are also a city that has a need for housing and a want for land. And utilizing a significant area of a property for single car parking on a flat level feels like a waste. We have options to build car garages, things like that. So while, yes, I understand parking is being displaced, I have a hard time valuing the capacity to park a single level car over the capacity for people to live in our city. So that's sort of my high level of opinion on the potential use of the development of this property. I think that it is a good space for homes. However, it is the first, right? And in this area, that is going to be difficult. It is, I think the townhouses are appropriate. I think scaling it down from a large condo unit to townhouses was a huge step in the right direction. And I think that it is one of those things, however, that we do need to pay attention to the potential future development of this space. On that note, I think the zero setbacks are inappropriate. I think that you have to allow for the possibility that more of this parking lot may be developed for more potential future housing. And saying, well, we don't need any setbacks at all is a bit lacking in foresight. So in the grand scheme of things, I think that this is a step in the right direction for this area. I think it will create more of a community. I think you will have several, areas where you'll actually have more connection to Town and Country. You'll have more people walking on foot because they're going to walk around the corner to Trader Joe's and get their groceries. But I think you do need to really respect the history and the care that's been taken for many years of Town and Country. And personally, I don't think that this design, architecturally speaking, is doing that. I think the geometry and the color palette are inappropriate for this location. It's not reflecting on Town and Country. It's not paying deference to it architecturally speaking. And while maybe that's not a requirement, I think that that's sort of the respect that can be paid voluntarily. I like the board and batten. That's obviously going in the theme that Trader Joe's went in when they put up their building. And again, it does not need to match, right? But when you look at these exterior elevations, when you look at these renderings, this type of series of townhouses could be anywhere in the city. You could pick up this plan and plunk it someplace else, and you would have zero context towards Town and Country. So what I would ask for you architecturally and with the palette and with the geometry specifically, try and pull it closer back. Try and get it a little bit closer to the Town and Country Village and pay a little bit of more architectural respect to the gem that we do have in this city. Again, those are sort of my high level comments. I would just say it just needs another pass. To get a little bit more nitty gritty, I agree with my colleagues that the first and the last townhomes, the parking and the backing out of those cars doesn't work. So whether they need to be flipped, mirrored, something like that, the consideration for those parking spaces in the first and the last 4 units, right? The first 2, the last 2, they just need to be reworked. It might be nice to add some pedestrian gates out to Town and Country on that backside so that people don't have to walk all the way around. I don't know if that's feasible, but food for thought. I think that the windows from the bedrooms need to be paid attention to so that you're not staring directly into your neighbor's bedroom. And I think overall, just a little bit more care. And while I understand this is the first pass and it's a step in the right direction, this is an important one, and it's going to set a precedent. It's going to set a tone for anything else that's going to be developed in this area and on this street and in this type of context. So since you're the first, the weight's on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Rosenberg. So I find myself in agreement with what Kendra just said, particularly regarding the materiality and geometry. I don't think they're sufficiently deferential to town and country. For example, you could consider using heavier timber posts for that trellis construction and do a few other items on the eve treatment of that to link it more to the town and country. I think the dark material, as Board Member Chen said, really does make the courtyard just seem too dark. I think the comments everyone's made about the functionality of the parking and service are well taken. Those front and rear parking areas are not functional the way they are. And I think that having a trash room all the way out on the street like that is also just going to be challenging for the tenants. I've given some thought to this at a higher level, though, and I think Encina Avenue will over time become a residential street with larger 3- and 4-story buildings on it. I think it's a no-brainer actually going over to the area, having watched it develop over the past couple of decades. It's a very well-placed location for residential use, and I think we should all celebrate and keep that going. I don't think that's at all what the comprehensive plan intended when they said the town and country should not be redeveloped for residential. What they meant is the town and country should not be replaced by a residential development. I don't think they were saying that auxiliary parking lot adjacent to the town and country can't be developed. I see this parking area as a separate parcels fronting Encina Avenue. And so I think it should be redeveloped with residential. Listening to the applicant, I'm really concerned where they're basically being forced into a 3-story type townhouse development for economic reasons. We're pointing out that that really isn't working. And I think to really meet some of these requirements we're stating about parking and such means it's not going to work. And you probably need a 4-story building at the minimum to make that work. I believe, as I've given some thought to this, that if with appropriate step backs on the upper floors, this building and a whole row of buildings at the back of town and country will be perfectly appropriate. I don't think the town and country will be negatively impacted by having a 3- or 4-story buildings adjacent to it. In fact, that happens in many places up and down the peninsula, and I think it might even be beneficial to town and country. So the council's overriding concern on this, one of them at least, was that the town and country be preserved. I don't think these are incompatible uses. And I would encourage the applicant to consider a slightly taller building in order to make the economics work. Whether or not they're townhouses, I can't say, but I think what's important is to try to step back from town and country more. The way that initial sketch you showed us, one thought I have is that if you went to a halfway submerged parking scheme, went down half a level, then you could have 3 stories on top of that. That might really facilitate your residential uses, allow you to step back maybe with some terraces or something at the town and countryside. There might be a middle path that gets you a little more development to make the economics work, that gets you steps back from town and country to respect them. I think we should all be conscious of the fact that we're setting a precedent here. Over the next decade, I think this parking lot will be redeveloped somehow. I think the other side of Encina will also be redeveloped. And all of that will probably end up being 3- and 4-story, maybe even 5-story residential buildings. So it's not entirely a crazy thing to try to plan for that now. I'm also dismayed by, at least to me, the idea of eyes on the street, of people living on Encina Avenue. Somehow your building really closes it off. There's sort of an iron gate where cars go through, and on either side of that is a pedestrian gate. And everything then is focused around this rather tight courtyard, which might make sense in a very tight developed area in San Francisco. But here we have an opportunity to develop Encina Avenue as a residential street. I would love to see these townhouses each having a stoop onto that street, doing something in a more traditional urban design pattern. To think of you being the first of what's going to be a series of residences fronting on Encina Avenue. And you're building, even your designs of the living rooms on the units facing Encina, you twist it so that you have 2 narrow slit windows, and there's not really a stronger presence on the street. That's the wall where the TV is going to go, rather than orienting it differently so that's got some eyes on the street, some presence. And to me, that's just a shame not to have the residential units opening to the public, to the street. And if you think of this as a lot that fronts on Encina Avenue, maybe there's a different way to go about it. So to summarize, I think that the massing and the use of the site for housing is perfectly appropriate. And the massing could even be more and still work. Something in the middle of 5 and 3 stories. And the design as it's presented now is not compatible enough. For a myriad of fashion reasons. Anybody else want to comment any more on this? Board Member Hirsch?
Yeah, I mean, it raises a new issue here, but it seems to me that my statement earlier about this project shouldn't go ahead really is part of what you are representing here is that it isn't really working as it is, and that there should be an overall plan for the parking lot that includes this site as well. And so that there would be a kind of a new development of Encina Avenue completely. What it becomes is really something that's part of the study, and it's going to be a more interesting, elaborate study of the block as potentially as a residential block. I think that's an interesting possibility, and it's unfortunate if the city somehow has to accept something now that really kind of compromises the future possibility.
Yes, I agree that it really points out a lack of planning. In this case, everyone was caught blindsided by this whole project happening. But we do not have an overriding plan for this area. And we're all sort of acknowledging what's going to happen there, us, the council, the applicants, the staff, and yet we don't have any idea of how we're going to get there really. And fitting this thing into the middle of that parking lot just doesn't seem right. The applicant has a right, and we want them to put something here. So what I'm saying, and maybe the board can come along with, is I think a little bit more massing than this. A 4-story building would be acceptable if you had step backs from town and country. Go ahead.
Agreed, and kind of piggybacking on your point, like we've been talking a lot about this in context of town and country, but also the other side of Encina is equally important of current and future development, and there are buildings of scale on the other side. And if you think about it as part of that street, it could have more scale and be precursor to other projects of larger scale.
It probably should have
Yes.
higher scale.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to fit housing in town. This is one of the best places I could think of to do it. There's so many reasons it's perfect for it. So to force them to 3-story townhomes seems wrong.
Agreed, especially some of the kind of the process schemes that were shown and that were, put aside for cost reasons. Like as the podium parking and units above seems more appropriate for this site, given, Palo Alto Medical Foundation, all of that, the context is really townhouses. Yes, it fits the cost, but it doesn't seem appropriate type of housing for that site. But that's, again, as a first of its type in that area. Maybe if the whole street became a series of townhouses, we'd have a different opinion about it, right?
Well, I could imagine a series of townhouses fronting on the street, 25-foot wide front porches, et cetera. That could be lovely. Then they would each have a deep backyard, and you get the real traditional San Francisco development. Obviously, our applicant can't do that. They're just doing one little piece of it. You could take the bold step of being the first ones, which is sort of where you're being squeezed into. But I'd like to hear our board at least chime in on our opinion of the massing and stuff. If they want to come back, that we would accept a larger building of sorts, as long as it was deferential to town and country, to backside. Any other comments or thoughts?
Yeah, if you look at the site, it becomes too constricted in its size. Basically, if you're starting to just put a house on the front of the street, and then it's a whole other design. And it really, to me, it's an oddball in that it sort of flew in here and took a piece of a area that should be planned from one end to the other. we ran into a problem like this on the Fry's site. I shouldn't really compare it as a measurement of this one, but that there has to be a recognition, especially because we're really having a housing crisis in this town. And I think a lot of the city is putting their head in the sand and not facing up to it, what we really need in terms of the quantity of housing, which may be absurd, in fact, but which at least we should recognize to some extent that there's a housing need in California. And we shouldn't put our head in the sand as a board, but come out and say that this site, this is a potentially good, really great site for a more dense housing, period. And that some of it could be low rise and some of it could be mid rise, but it should be a planned site of some sort. And that this particular piece, if it is built, will then prevent the possibility of the rest of it being developed properly.
Would you support Board Member Hirsch making this say a 4-story building, making it taller, more massive?
No, I mean, I think there are ways in which it could be improved by putting the parking, maybe as you suggested, a half level down. And then you would have that possibility of another level. And I think there are many, many possibilities here as an entire site, not as an individual building.
So we're forced or requested to give the applicant feedback on their proposal. And what I've heard is sort of not all over the map. We're consistent on a lot of things, but it's not really giving them any clear direction where to go. And go ahead, Board Member Chen.
Yeah, actually, I agree about the massing comments. I think the applicant should consider both the town countryside and the street side, so that the street may be developed differently using a different concept along the street. And also material wise, there might be some new ideas come out for the new materials and colors. And also I would suggest the applicant maybe provide a perspective view in the future standing on the town and countryside, so that to convince people that this 3 or 4 or maybe 5-story building does not impact the town country center.
Yeah, I think I might be the only person that actually feels that the townhouses are quite nice here. So I will take that on my shoulders. But I do like the townhouses. I think that they're nice and I think that they're an appropriate scale. So for me personally, I'm not going to encourage a 4-story building next to the very, very low slung town and country. That being said, if there was a stepping up that was to happen, maybe in the front townhouses or maybe in some capacity that way, that the front facing Encina was slightly taller or a story taller, not opposed to that. I do think that the 3-story on the town and countryside is appropriate. I just think that the geometry is what's lacking at this point, but the massing is not the concern that I have on that side. Again, would I allow for the possibility of it getting taller in the front towards Encina? Absolutely. But I do want to continue to push for that respect architecturally towards town and country. So that's where I would have a concern just bumping this whole thing up to a 4-story. And looking at those iterations you guys provided was actually incredibly helpful, and appreciate the thought and care and concern that was in the scaling down of this. So I think that the townhouses are actually quite nice and have the potential to be very charming. And while we would love to see this whole Encina strip of parking lot redeveloped as one cohesive, that's not what we have right now. We have to work with what we're presented with, and we have to work with what you guys have in your hands. I could see a series of these little townhousing enclaves down that street in the future, and that would make a lot of sense. Could I see this whole thing being developed at once? Yes, that would also make a lot of sense. But we are where we are. I think what you've presented is like I said, it's a step in the right direction. So to summarize, on Encina being taller, I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't go taller than 3 stories towards town and country, though. I think that would just be too imposing visually. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been driving Kendra to give them the opportunity to have more than 10 units. Their initial proposal was 20. And just look at the visual of what we're doing. They come in with 20 units, we push them back to 10. Here we go again. Palo Alto constantly forcing less housing, less development.
Understood,
This is,
yes.
we all say this is the perfect site. We all agree. And if it weren't for Town and Country, the larger building would be fine. So the question really is a larger building compatible with Town and Country? All of us have said, if you step it down at the back, you'd be more respectful with your materials and your geometry and design of Town and Country. You can pull that off. And we don't think it'll be negatively impacting the shopping center, which is important. But you get more units here, which will make your economics work and it will be better for the town. That's what we need. So I love townhouses, Kendra, as a concept, but if you can get 15 condos instead, that's better in my book.
I've got a comment on this. You know, there's so many different ways you could do a project like this. And I just would suggest that, you know, as we make this kind of a statement, that changes this particular project to be something that it isn't. It isn't that at all now. That changes the access, the stairways, the privacy, the open space, everything will change once you add another level. And the parking will change as well. So, I mean, you can imagine that this as a prototype could be reproduced 2 or 3 times down the block. More to what Kendra was saying, that it could do that. You know, you could have 3 times the number of units by doing 3 of these instead of just 1 by itself. And then imagine that what you're suggesting is a greater density is another structure. Maybe it's at the railroad end of the block and it's a little bit taller and could take smaller apartments, et cetera. This is a study, which is why I'm saying you really need to study the whole area. And I think it's unfortunate that this project got split off, which is why I'm saying we shouldn't be considering this by itself. We have to think that it needs a site planning for the entire block. It has to respect the Encina side. It has to respect the Town and Countryside. It has to respect the design of Town and Country, which is very significant. And I accept your point of view about the heavier timbers in some way being part of this, because that's the character of Town and Country. It has to accept the canopy level of thinking, which isn't really done that well here, but could be applied in some way to this project. So it's a bigger project. It ought to be a bigger project. And we should hold out as a board and say, we don't think that this one piece by itself is sufficient for this block, that this is an important area of the city, that we should be imagining the future of it as a more significant housing project, which I think we all really would like to see.
I'm going to jump in here because while I agree in an ideal world, we would develop this site, that's not what we have. We have 2 separate owners, right? We have, this owner has got 1 parcel to work with. And we need to understand that, like, while it would be great to have this whole urban planning session and get multiple owners together and develop this whole thing all at the same time, that's not what we have. We have 1 parcel and we have 1 developer, and this is the proposed project. And the question at hand is, do we think that this proposed project at hand is appropriate for this space in the time that it is, while keeping open the possibility of future development? But we can't force them to do this all at once. There's no way for that. So personally, while it would also be nice to have high density housing at this time, if nothing else gets developed, I think that would be an over imposition on this site. I think the townhouse concept is an appropriate scale and mass and density for what we have today, while still allowing for the possibility of growth in the future. I think if you put a 5-story condo building right there and nothing else ever gets developed around it, it's going to be an eyesore. It's going to be a problem. And I think that this townhouse is sort of that middle ground stepping stone that is actually what this site and this project needs at this time. So that's where I'm going to leave my comments for today. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know how much more we can add without just repeating ourselves. So staff, do you think we've provided sufficient feedback from our side of it? I just don't know what else to do. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, it definitely seems like You've discussed it extensively. I've taken down some good notes. We always filter through when we're making our recommendations to the applicant. So, we're going to make sure that all of your opinions are represented.
Okay, so let's close out this subject and take a few minute break before we get going. So let's start again at 10:30 with our next item. So we're going to go into break. And our next item is a study session summary of focus group review and feedback on the existing SB9 standards continued from November 16th, 2023. If we could pick up staff with reminding us where we left off and continue.
Good morning, Amy French, Chief Planning Officials. Here with slide number 7 from the November 16th ARB meeting where we left off. So today we start with this page. I noted 12.7 here to help us rejigger and get ourselves back. Sorry, there's somebody speaking. Coming back to the room. Now we have all 5 members in place. So we're here with items B7 through B14 on the screen. And I do believe we have Arnold Mamarella attending the meeting as well. So if the board has questions for Arnold or staff, we're available.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to figure out where we were in this process, exactly which item we were on. B7, and that's on the previous packet. So are we able to just go back to our previous packet as a guide to work from?
Yes, on the screen is the B7 through B14 to help focus.
I'm sorry, I'm just having a tough time getting myself oriented here. What page on the previous packet was it? Oh, so much farther ahead, that's what it is.
I guess I should tap dance a little. And for the public, we are resuming a public hearing that began on November 16th. And what we're doing is looking at the proposed revised standards, based on the process that we went through with the Architecture Review Board back in spring 2023. And in summer 2023, we spent time, 3 meetings to be precise, with members of a focus group that included architects that have been involved in the SB9 application process.
Okay, so we were talking about section B regarding 2-story houses. And what we've been doing is going through each one of these items. If we had questions, discussing them, otherwise continuing. So we were on B7, screening landscape. Does anyone have any comments regarding that section? If not, the next one is B8, planting type and size. I have written down a note to myself whether we want to have a requirement for native species, that being a requirement that we have typically on the commercial side. Does anybody else have any comments on this?
Some comments. Let's slow down a little.
Oh, okay. Well, would you like to go back to section B7, David, or should we start at the top on 2-story houses, section B? We covered the first 6, I believe.
Well, I have a question about how the screening and landscaping works specifically on tight sites where you can't have a continuous screening on the sides of a project. What happens, for example, my own house, I have a photograph that I submitted before. It's part of, well, Claire has it. I could put it up, but I'll describe the situation. I have a 45-foot lot that happens to be my house. And so one side is a 6-foot setback and the other side is 14, 15 feet.
Can I
Sure.
stop you there? Because Claire did forward to
Yeah,
Veronica and myself this morning. So I can stop sharing this screen if you would like us to share the photos that you
Thanks.
sent us by email.
Yeah,
Give us a minute.
okay.
So David, to understand, you want to show us some photos you've taken to support questions about item B7, the landscape screening?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to present that.
Okay, I mean, I could also describe it.
I
Just
think
simply.
we're all pretty
No?
well versed.
You
in
want to
this
see
stuff,
it? That's fine.
So let's limit it to maybe 3 minutes though. Is that okay, David? Just
Yes.
put a time on this. So why don't you discuss to us your opinions about landscape screening?
All right. In some here we go. There's more. Well, yeah, keep going. Maybe it's on here. I'm not sure if it's part of this one. Just stop there for a moment. To the left-hand side, I can almost point it out to you. There's a 6-foot space. That 6-foot space is a lower metal gate that gets you to a side yard. The side yard is 6 feet wide. I actually have light wells within the side yard taking up 3 feet of the 6 feet that extend down to a basement. It's not possible to put trees in the area of the house itself. What do you do in a situation like that?
So the screening landscaping requirement is to have at least 1 tree per 25 feet of property length. These do not need to be evenly spaced, so it would be possible to stagger it in places where there's light wells or something like that. Additionally, in cases where there is a 6-foot setback, again, this is typically something that we require on individual review projects. But some SB 9 projects may potentially have as little as a 4-foot setback. So that can be studied more, but typically we haven't had, any comments from, building or fire that it's been an issue to have landscaping in the side yard setbacks.
To add to it, the other slide that I have, maybe I could find it, but I don't really want to waste that much time on one item here. So in the 6-foot, I have my garbage cans, I have the gas meters, it's water meters, et cetera. All of these things take up space. And there are some trees that you could put in that are very shallow at the base, like I forgot the name of them, but in any case, anybody knows they can add it in. Within 2 feet, but it would eliminate the possibility of the light wells for sure. There wouldn't be passage through that side of the house. The garbage cans wouldn't be able to get in and out. Maybe the point is that it would be an IR, right? And any project like that. But what if actually when we're trying to get tighter buildings onto these sites and it is allowed that you have a 6-foot setback based on the daylight plane, et cetera, you may not be able to get planting at all in that area. So I don't think it's reasonable to suggest that you can have a continuous line of trees spaced 25 feet apart. I think it needs more study.
Okay, so David, I'm hearing you say that you think requiring landscaping almost of any kind on a 6-foot setback doesn't work.
Yeah, might not
Okay.
work.
And in this section B7, it does offer the option to have 3 closely spaced screening shrubs instead of trees. Do you think that would work?
Depends.
Because we're trying to give some standard. I don't think you want to say you have no landscape for privacy, right? So the idea is to try to come up with some geometry for these plants that give some level of
It depends
privacy.
upon the use of that kind of space. You restrict the use of that side of a house by that assumption that you're going to have planting there.
So I think to my colleagues, I'm hearing Board Member Hirsch say that the planting requirement for B7 is not realistic on 6-foot setback conditions. Is that right, David?
That's right.
Who else has a comment about that?
And just for clarification on that, because it does require a tree 1 every 25 feet. So kind of like what you're alluding to, it seems doable to have every 25 feet. And if they can't, then it's an IR. I don't think we should blanketly remove the requirement of screening trees from B7. and the allowance to use shrubs instead of trees, kind of like if you do have only a 18-inch strip to plant on, you could do shrubs instead.
Yeah.
So I think it is, I don't think we should eliminate the requirement.
Colleagues, anybody else? Board Member Chen, are you, put your finger on that button?
No, yeah, I agree. I think there should be some requirement in this case, is that because privacy is important, especially for 2 stories. And when when the SB9 projects comes, the setback will be like only goes to 4 feet. There should be some requirement in that case. But I agree for 4 feet wide, there is limitation of selection of the tree species.
Is perhaps 20 feet too tall for a mature shrub expectation?
Oh, yeah, and actually that comes to another question that I currently meet, because I'm currently working on the project and my neighbors doesn't want to plant any shrubberies or trees along the fence at all, because they said, oh, I don't want 20 feet tall trees to block my backyard, like the daylight or the views. So they strongly rejected to planting anything. And my clients doesn't care about whether to plant or no. So in that case, is there a way to make an exception to not planting anything?
Staff, what's the situation when neither property owner wants the landscape screening?
Through the IR process, because it is discretionary, there can be some option to consider alternatives, but overall, we usually do strongly encourage or require the privacy landscaping. Though there have been instances where neighbors have been against it. And of course, one of the considerations for SB9 projects are that neighbors will not have the opportunity to comment because they are ministerial projects.
Would it be possible to add in ministerially if the adjacent property owner waives in writing that requirement, it can be waived? Is that getting too complicated?
We don't have a mechanism for ministerial projects because these are not handled by a planner that is focused on design review. This is just, going through. So I don't think that's something we would, once it's an exception, it goes through the IR process. That's how it goes.
I'm not talking an exception. I'm just saying you can either provide these landscape screens or provide written notification that the adjacent owner doesn't want them.
There's no notification requirement for the
IR.
SB9 projects because they are building permit projects rather than planning entitlement projects. The rationale behind there not being a noticing requirement is that the neighbors do not have an opportunity to appeal the project. So it would be difficult to give neighbors that type of opportunity without creating.
Well, this would be on the applicant though. I mean, they would need to go approach the neighbor and figure out if they approve it or not.
But the neighbor would have to know that they don't want the landscaping.
The neighbors will not know about the SB9 project at all. It's ministerial. There will not be an opportunity for neighbors to participate in any SB9.
Right.
We're going through this, right? So people can't appeal it. It's not appealable. There's no participation at all.
I was just looking for a way to make it easier if nobody wants it, to just make that part of the ministerial process. But it may be that it's just too complicated. I don't know. I think the landscaping is fine. 25 feet doesn't seem like that much to me. Any architect can deal with that. I mean, it's not that hard, I don't think. But I do think, for example, looking at the photo of David's house here, is that bamboo, David, on the right of your driveway?
Yes,
That's probably not 20 feet tall, and probably
it's not 25 feet. No, it
in the
isn't.
Sunset book, I bet it doesn't reach a mature height of 20 feet.
13.
Maybe the 20-foot number in the standard here is too much.
That and if it's shrubs, that the mature height, mature width is 5 feet. If the side yard is going to be, 4 feet.
Yeah,
asking
how can
for
we
a minimum
relax? How
mature
can we
width of
relax
5
that a
feet.
little bit?
Yeah.
What's a better, more
I think
appropriate?
for like tighter shrubs, 3 feet is as mature width is enough.
Where do you-
And height in the order of like 15, 16.
Where do you find out what's the mature height of a shrub? How do you guys do that when you're enforcing?
As-
I just like to say podocarpus, that's the name I'm trying to think of here, right? Podocarpus will grow to it'll grow up to a minimal tree, but it'll be 8 or 10 feet tall for sure.
Or it can grow to be huge, yeah.
Could be higher,
So I was just.
within
asking,
2 feet of space.
so how would you enforce this, Emily?
Podocarpus is certainly a common screening tree in the individual review projects. We have a list of a couple others that are commonly used. But in terms of looking up what the mature heights of trees are, there's a couple of websites. You noted the sunset guidelines. There's also a website, I believe it's called Select a Tree, that also has that information.
Okay.
The image, by the way, could you, Veronica, could you raise the image that's shown here a little bit so you could look at that alleyway? Nope, the next one. Oh, the next image, yeah. So this is what happens in my side yard. And the house, of course, is more than 25 feet deep.
Yeah, I see a planting bin here already, David. I mean, you've got room for something. I
Have a-
see some vegetable garden right there.
Right
Obviously, you're
in the
going to-
line of the
You could fit some.
light
shrub-
well in the
Okay.
line.
I'm of the opinion that we should reduce the mature shrubs from 20 feet to, say, 13 feet and the width to 3 feet.
Mhm.
It's all arbitrary, but just trying to make it a little bit easier to fit something in there. Any other thoughts?
I would agree with that, but I might knock it to 10 feet even, because you really just need a little bit of screening. Fences go to, what, 6, 7 feet if you're lucky. And so just a few feet above that, I would actually try and make that screening just a bit more modest. And I know we're talking just a few numbers here and a few numbers there, and it is pretty arbitrary, but I'm just,
So this is intended to apply to 2-story homes. So you're supposed to be screening the 2nd-story bulk.
okay.
So
What's an appropriate height for
If you,
that? Yeah.
Just from my working with landscape architects and our planting choices, their, shrubs will say this will grow 12 to 15 feet, and the
Mhm.
next one will say 16 to 20, like plants and trees. So
Right.
I think if we kind of use those kind of numbers, because there'll be shorter ones, they'll say mature height 8 to 10 feet, right? So I think if we say 12 feet, we're probably talking in the 12 to 15 range type plants.
Okay.
So that would be fine.
so 12-foot height,
12 foot, good with that.
your wheels are spinning. What are you thinking?
No, yes, you just mentioned here, we are talking about 2-story house, right? So the intent is to protect the privacy. So for 12 feet, I was thinking about, okay, so even when they do a 9-foot ceiling and plus the floor, the thickness of the floor, and then for the 2nd floor facing the side yard, we require most of them are to be above. The window sill would be 5 feet from finished floor. So that already adds up to 14 feet.
14 feet, yeah,
Yeah, 15
Mhm.
feet if including the floor thickness.
could easily.
So
Yeah.
should we say 15 feet then?
Well, the side yard, the window sill height that you mentioned already makes it so you are not looking out that window and looking into the other neighbor's house, right? So I think the screening of like up to 12 feet is mainly screening from the 1st floor out and having some sort of landscaping when you're looking out from anywhere else. Because when we say shrubs at 15 feet, it's a whole other type of category of shrubs, so that's what I don't want to push it to. You can only have those tall columnar trees is really the only way to get there. It seems a little too restrictive if we're talking about shrubs. If we're talking about trees, of course, that's a different set of categories. But
Is Arnold on with us? Does he have an opinion on this?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening to you. I think it's a good discussion about the shrubs and this and how tall they should be. Mainly, it's the issue of if they're substituting shrubs for trees in a side yard, are they still of a capacity enough that they're screening the upper floor of the house rather than just being kind of a fence-high shrub? And a lot of those shrubs that people plant, they can always clip them to be a lower hedge. So some consideration is needed for, what is actually installed. Will it actually screen some of the mass of the upper floor? So the concern in the guidelines is not just privacy, but privacy and also screening the upper floor. So I think 15 feet, there's a lot of shrubs that grow to around that. So there's a good number of selection that people can have.
Okay. Board Member Adcock, you seem to be the one trying to get a little bit less than that. Can you wrap your head around 15 feet? Do we have a consensus on that?
Yes, just with the caveat that when its side yard is 4 feet wide, shrubs that go 15 feet tall are not as skinny as 2 feet wide, so it's kind of the proportion is another thing that I want to make sure we consider.
Well, we're trying to give them options. So these are minimums. We said 3 feet wide, I think you had suggested.
Mhm.
It sounds like we're coming to 15-foot height, 3-foot width
As a minimum.
as a minimum. Do we have
Yeah, I'm
consensus on that?
good with that.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
I mean,
Okay, so-
I've got oleander that's growing in 8 inches of dirt between my fence line and my neighbors, and it's 15, 16 feet tall.
So I'm hearing a suggestion of shrub height is minimum of 15 feet and 3-foot width. And let's do a straw poll on that. Are we all in agreement? David? Say yes.
Say yes. Yes.
Kendra?
Yes.
Say
I
yes.
agree.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to try once more and ask Arnold to give his comment on this. If an adjacent property owner submits in writing a statement that they agree to not have privacy screening, can that be used instead of meeting this requirement?
Generally, when we have that come up in the individual review context, we generally require some landscape along the side yards, but it's usually a height issue, and we usually will sort of allow them to select items that are of more limited height. But just in terms of like, we want no landscape along that lot line at all. I think usually we sort of try to find a compromise that works well with the neighbor, but is not just completely, avoiding the issue.
I guess I'm more sympathetic to what Board Member Chen was talking about. This is sort of an agreement between consenting adults. And if they don't want landscaping on their property line, who's the city to be telling them they have to have it? I don't see it forming neighborhood character. And if it's something that can be done as a simple mechanism, just a letter from one property owner to the other, why would that not be adequate? So I don't know if it's something that's been done before. Typically, the rules try to go beyond any one property owner. The fear is if the next owner doesn't like it, then you have a problem. But I'm sensitive to the situation Board Member Chen was just discussing.
It
Is that
seems that
something that we could-
the city doesn't have a way of
Right.
regulating this.
If it was a letter from one property owner to the other that the city gets a record of, maybe it's a recorded letter even, who cares?
I think, sorry if I may speak.
Yeah.
The issue is that we can't require the property owner to reach out to the neighbors that they're filing this project.
Even if that's an exception, allowing them to not follow this rule?
There wouldn't be any kind of incentive to not plant landscaping because, sometimes the property owners do want the privacy landscaping. And typically when you tell the neighbors about one part of the project, they're going to want to know about the rest of the project. And it would put
That's a good
the
point.
city in a difficult position since these are ministerial projects.
If I can put in 2 cents here, I think that what this is this is sort of a voluntary action, right? You can either plant the shrubs and never talk to your neighbors. If you know you've got a neighbor who's going to be irked, you suck it up and plant the shrubs. Option 2 is that we have some sort of form that's one piece of paper, both parties sign it, they put their addresses on, and it's just that basic. So if they want to choose to take that path with that neighbor, they have that option. It's not required. Right. So you're not forcing them to reach out to their neighbors. unless they want to find this exception. And then B, once the neighbor is informed, let's say the neighbor says, no, I do want the privacy screening, it still places the burden on the person building the SB9 project to put the screening in, right? It's their project, it's their issue, so they have to deal with it. And if they've now opened the project's awareness to the neighbor's gonna find out when they start construction, right? So at some point, the neighbor is gonna become aware that this project is happening. It's just the question is of when. And even if this is if the neighbor's made aware of this project's construction early, it's still following all the other rules. There's really nothing that can be done. We would be potentially avoiding obnoxious emails for you guys to have to field. But other than that, I feel like this is a very voluntary, simple, straightforward thing that can happen. And again, as long as it's not required, then I don't see what the conflict is.
I have a counter to that. I mean,
Please.
it makes sense in terms of this narrow window of the shrubs, but that's one of the many items. If I can get my neighbor to say, you can have a 3-foot sill height instead of 5 foot, variety of other points that you can have as part of a building permit application, 20 letters about 20 things they want to not do in the side yard or do differently.
It's a great point. My counter argument would be that planting is living and impermanent. A window height is reasonably permanent, right? So if one neighbor lived there and said, okay, well, we don't want the planting, and then they move out 2 years later and a new labor, you can plant something pretty quickly and reasonably affordably. Now, it's not going to be easy to say, okay, well, we are okay with the lower sill heights, but then that neighbor moves out 2 years later. Now this person has to go back and tear out windows, replace siding. Like, it's a very different ballgame. So while I appreciate the concern about the slippery slope, I think that the difference between window heights and landscape shrubbery is a pretty dramatic difference that I wouldn't necessarily have those same concerns for.
Yeah, it just starts like this list
Yeah,
of
it's
what is,
Slippery slope.
yeah, exactly.
Well, you could argue that maybe that's the way it should be. If two neighbors don't want to worry about the privacy between their windows, who are we to tell them otherwise? And if one neighbor voluntarily agrees to let the other have a bigger window, that affects the value of their property for any future owner. It's all very transparent. And again, I guess it just comes to me as otherwise an excessive regulation level. Who are we to try to regulate privacy between houses if both people don't want that?
If I can jump in, I'm a little concerned that we were ready to move on and we've taken quite a bit of time on an area that the ARB will never be involved in. So maybe we could, it's on advisement. Staff is taking all of this on advisement and consideration. So we can move on to the next item if that's all right.
Well, it's fine to move on. What I'd like to suggest is, Amy, could the staff consider creating some sort of form that would allow this landscaping privacy between neighbors? I think you'd have to talk to council to see if it's even legally viable or feasible. And yes, it's just a recommendation from the board. It's not even clear if it's entirely supported. But we're not going to put anything beyond that. So let's go on to the next item then, was the planting.
What number? What are we on?
B8 is requiring
It's on the screen now, B8.
50% evergreen screening. Trees are 24-inch box or 15-gallon shrubs. What is this? Oh, 8 feet when they're planted. And I had questioned whether native species should go in. Is 8 feet when planted a realistic requirement for a shrub?
This is a standard condition of approval for individual review projects. It has, it's something that we have been going out and doing as a part of our final inspections for the last several years. And it is something that most applicants have been able to meet.
Okay.
What's an evergreen? Is bamboo an evergreen?
Sure.
It is. Okay. Yeah, you
I
sure?
would default to urban forestry for that type of question.
Yeah, there's widely accepted standards for that.
See, I have bamboo on my property line on one side only. And it is about 14 feet tall and is doing a pretty good job of shading.
Is there any appetite to question the species that's being selected? I guess not. Okay, let's go on.
Actually, but per your comment about native plant, I think that is a good idea, but as in this, like when it says 50% screening shall be evergreen, we should also, if we're gonna ask for some amount of native, we should also put a percentage to that is 25% of the planting, so that half of evergreens and half of non could be. So just, we should be specific if we want to add native requirement.
Is it possible, staff, to publish a list of acceptable shrubs and trees that are native and also what these sizes are to avoid future discrepancies?
Yes, we currently have that list. That's essentially available upon request by the applicants. That lists are evergreen, screening, landscape. They're also, so the list that we have are drought tolerant, regionally adapted screen trees, which applicants are able to ask if they don't know what they want to plant.
But that's not a mandatory list, that's just advice.
Correct. I also, these projects are required to meet all the other code requirements and the MWELO, which I'm not going to be able to tell you what that stands for, but it is kind of for water efficiency for the landscaping. I believe it encourages native species and they would be required to meet those requirements.
So you think maybe an additional requirement here is not necessary?
It's just that WELO does help, but it's more about drought tolerance than native. But I mean, I don't have a strong opinion one way
I'm
or
just
the
coming
other.
at this because it's a clear requirement in the Architecture Review Board findings under our landscape stuff. And if we're pushing for it there, why wouldn't the city push for it everywhere? Just to be consistent. It's not something I believe the IR process ever regulates, right? What species you choose is your own business.
Correct. Compared to larger projects that might have a larger impact on the city based on its size and goes through a more comprehensive design review process. The individual review projects, since they are all single family houses, have been historically granted, the flexibility for the property owner to decide what type of landscaping they want in their own backyards.
And of course, with the IR process being discretionary, there is the opportunity for appeals, directors' hearings where trees are discussed. In the SB 9 process, that would not be happening.
I'm not sure I want to push this any further. I think just let it go. Next item, if we go on to B9, is planting in public utility easements. I'm not sure I understand what this is saying. Is this requiring that trees be planted when you have a PUE? Or is it just saying where they're planted when you have one, if you want to?
The intent of this is to note that public utility easements, which are typically the last 5 feet of a rear yard when they are present, are not exempt from the landscaping requirements for the 1 per 25 feet. And therefore is more of a reminder to applicants that that landscaping has to be planted outside of the public utility easement.
But you can plant within the easement if you want. There's currently no regulation against that.
You cannot plant anything of a certain height as it may impact utilities, or sometimes planting lower things if the utilities are underground can impact the ability for the utilities to be serviced. And so we have been advised by the utilities department to not plant anything there.
So what this is going to require then is in my hypothetical 100-foot deep lot, I've got a 5-foot utility easement across the back. That's a very common situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now being required to plant 1 tree every 25 feet across the backyard, 5 feet in from the back fence.
Correct.
And if I have, say, a 20-foot backyard, because that's the zoning setback, 15 feet of that is all I really have because of this line. I've cut away 25% of my yard in the back.
Correct.
And I don't think that's a fair thing at all.
And how does this apply to something like an ADU that only has to be 4 feet? Because those will have to respect the 5-foot setback of a PUE, but then do they have to move that ADU farther in so that they can plant something between it and the PUE?
So the 1 per 25 feet, as I mentioned earlier, is not necessarily intended to create a continuous hedge. It would be typical for there to be, the ADU and then 2 or 3 trees planted at the 5-foot line.
But again, if, let's say the ADU is 30 feet across and you've got a 5-foot setback and it's right at the PUE, then that entire 30-foot ADU has to have some notch out to get a tree in, right? So that's where if the length of a structure that's right next to a PUE is longer than 25 feet, then you either have to find a way to notch out a portion of that. So this is, I'm with Peter on this. This is making me a little bit concerned that you'll have to dramatically affect the architecture of these structures to accommodate a single tree.
If I could go back to B7, I didn't notice this. It says that this tree screening requirement is required along each interior lot line. I think we've been assuming that was on the side lot lines, but you're talking about the back line as well?
Correct, particularly because, as you noted, the privacy landscaping is secondary to permanent privacy requirements, which on the side yards are fairly substantial with the 5-foot sills or the obscured glazing. But for the rear-facing windows or side-facing windows that are more than, at one point it was 20 feet away from the property line. I don't recall if that number has changed in this current draft, but you're allowed to have larger and fully clear windows if it's the certain distance away. And so then the landscaping in those areas becomes the primary privacy feature.
If I can add one more thing, this is only a quantity standard. It's not saying, as Emily said, that at every 25 feet, you have to plant a tree at every 25 feet. It's only saying what quantity has to go, and they have the flexibility to put them, anywhere in that yard that they can make it work, even if they're clustered on one side.
I'm sorry, is that really the case? It says here 1 per 25 feet. I don't think it would make sense to allow somebody to put all 3 trees in the back of their property and have none on the.
It would be per property line. It's actually pretty similar to the way that the objective standards for the multifamily properties is written, the intent and the way staff has interpreted it. If you have, say, a 100-foot deep and 50-foot wide lot, then you would have 4 shrubs or trees along the interior side and 2 along the rear yard, but the exact placement of those, it doesn't need to be evenly spaced.
Could you have a stretch of property line bigger than 25 feet without a tree?
Potentially, yes, which would accommodate ADUs and that sort of thing.
But that would then not give you privacy screening. In the situation David was pointing out, then you would just put all the trees in the back.
Yeah, you'd clump 3 trees in a corner and call it a day.
And then what's the point? We're not achieving any privacy. I was interpreting this to mean that in any given 25-foot stretch, you have to have a tree or 3 shrubs.
And the way that it's written of quantity of at least 1 per 25 linear feet along each line seems to be every 25 feet. So if it's going to be rewritten, it should be at least 1 per length of 20 feet.
So
Right, the way that it's written, it reads that it should be planted 1 every 25 linear feet at a minimum. But again, I think we just need to clarify the wording, whichever way we lean. And
My
personally,
expectation is that's what I think
Yeah.
it should be.
yeah, because it would be odd to say, okay, well, I have a 75-foot deep property. I'm going to take all 3 of those trees and put them right in the back corner together and create a little baby orchard.
So we'll take a look at that wording.
Thank
Okay.
you.
But I think our intent is that the trees should be regulated such that they are in the places where you want them.
We'll take a
Right,
look at the
and
wording so it gets
this
the effect.
allows it to have flexibility in where it's placed.
So I'm going to,
I want to ask a sort of a related question. What is the fencing requirement for a rear yard between 2 properties?
it's none.
Technically, per the zoning code, fences are not a requirement. It is technically a choice of the property owners, though we don't often see people choose not to have a fence. And then the maximum height for the interior side that is at least 16 feet back from the front property line, and then all around the rear yard is 7 feet.
7 feet.
And there's no building permit required for fences on single-family home properties.
So is there any way to eliminate item B9 altogether? This is a statement about public utility easements and leave it between an applicant and the utility district where they put the tree. I really think it's a mistake the way it's done. Many projects on tight lots, this will result in trees absolutely where people don't want them.
I don't know if, I was going to invite Arnold to speak on that since this is
Yeah.
something we typically do.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because what people often do is they see that there's an easement and they don't plan for any landscaping, and then they get kind of backed into a corner. So if the board feels that the presence of the easement sort of diminishes the need for the landscape, then that would be your sentiment on it. But if you feel the landscape is important, having this requirement in there would let the people know that they can't get out of landscaping just because they happen to have an easement, and they have to accommodate somehow.
Well, could we just state that the landscape requirement is required even if there's a public utility easement? I'm just trying to not overregulate the positioning of that landscaping. Essentially, this is trying to regulate the use of the easement between people and the utility company. And let a person building their house put the trees wherever they think they can get them to meet whatever requirements they have with the easement. Just don't stipulate that here. That's what I'm pushing for.
It's also somewhat to, since I think in the earlier one, like the expectation is that these would be on the perimeter. This standard also allows them to be outside of the easement, which is a requirement anyway.
But is that even required to regulate in that case? Because in your backyard, you can plant whatever anywhere, right? This is more of what is required. So one tree every 25 feet in the backyard, and because of the easement, you're pulling that one tree every 25 feet inboard, like Peter was saying. So anything inboard of the screening trees, the homeowner can plant whatever they want, trees, shrubs, anything else, right? So is there a reason to regulate the inboard planting?
It says here along each interior lot line. And I would think that word along is sufficient to say whether it's right next to the fence or 5 feet in. And again, why not just let that to property owners decide?
I don't see a problem in saying trees or shrubs. Would that solve it for this B9? Because right now it just says trees.
Where
So
is this?
shrubs include bamboo, because we have an advocate of bamboo.
Where an easement such as a PU
And
exists,
podocarpus.
trees or shrubs are required to be planted on the same side of the easement as the building. I just want to strike the thing, but not within the easement. I don't want to make it so people are required by the planning department.
So we've heard your feedback, and can we move on to the next one? Because we've gotten your feedback.
No, I'd like to get the board to decide on this.
You want to have a
What's my
full vote on
collection?
that? Okay.
What do my colleagues think about this issue?
I appreciate Amy's concept that this would be trees or shrubs. I think that's important to allow that flexibility. I also, in other cities, there's times we're not allowed to plant anything in the PUE. It has to be in a mobile container. It has to be something like that, because imagine they plant a beautiful cherry tree and that thing grows, 10 inches in diameter, and then all of a sudden they need to get in the PUE, then they're hacking down your cherry tree, right? So there's some of that maybe that's the risk the owner assumes. But by assuming that risk, if that does come to the point where they have to cut down the tree, then they've lost their privacy screening. So there's a little bit of a problem here. I'd almost be inclined to say in a PUE, it should be only shrubs, because those are easier to cut down, they're easier to replace. And I think that trees in a PUE just might be inappropriate. So maybe it's only shrubs in a PUE. Right. they can be in a mobile container so that you can roll it back and forth if needed something. But I do have a hard time saying, yeah, let's plant an oak tree in a PUE and then watch that become a problem 20 years later. So that's my concern about.
I would echo that we wouldn't allow an oak tree planting. I mean, something that significant, because then of course it's a protected tree.
Right,
So we don't
exactly.
want to have that type
But
of planting.
it doesn't specify that. So if someone's like, I want to plant a tree and I love oaks, then what, or a redwood tree, and then you've got this 45-foot tall tree in your PUE.
I would say that's an elegant solution to say at a minimum shrubs, and then we can move on.
Okay, so can we change the phrasing to that then? We all in agreement there? Next one is B10, privacy screening. It seems to repeat what's already been done, but I don't see any problem with it.
Yeah.
In fact, when you combine B10 with B7, it sort of takes up the question of the spacing of the trees, really.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, is there a reason that B10 and B7 are separate? Can we combine them? Clarify this a little bit, streamline it?
Noted.
I think that's a fair comment, staff. Why don't you see if clean all that up? Okay, next page is B11.
Oh, wait, sorry. So for B9, I'm not sure, shall we weigh in on the public works and let them to make a requirement on maximum shrub heights since there are safety concerns within the easement? If we allow the shrubs to be to be planted in the PUE, then shall we require like a maximum height it can go? Is it still 15 feet, or is it safe enough for the public works to make a?
That's something we can look into, but I don't think that we can have the ARB make that decision.
Sure, yeah. I just want to bring it up.
So B11 is something we've struggled with before, and B12 really regarding second floor window privacy. Okay. I had commented, I'll start off on this, I guess, that for any window on an upper floor or in a stairway, I had wanted to put in there that stairways and hallways and bathrooms are not subject to this privacy requirement. That's typically what happens in the IR process, I believe. And then down below, the last sentence says in a stairway, et cetera. Again, I don't believe that the IR that regulates that, but maybe Arnold can speak to that. But is there any other comments from board members first?
Yes, sorry. Took a minute to get my thought. The 5 feet from finished floor will automatically prohibit any emergency egress windows from being on those facades. So the unintended consequence of this 5-foot minimum sill height is that you'll never have a bedroom window facing the neighbors, which I do think actually increases privacy. And I think sort of forces you to regulate these windows towards the interior of the lot. So just sort of making a comment, I actually think that's a good thing. However, I'm not a very tall human, so 5-foot tall windows are a little.
Well, but Kendra
right.
gives you the option of using translucent glazing.
Yeah,
You can
to go
meet- You
down.
can meet egress codes. That's something that's pretty typical with the IR process.
It is.
Yeah.
Mid-house bedroom,
And
it's going to need that.
In Palo Alto, we use 5 feet in the IR process.
That
Yes.
believe
Yes.
that's the
Okay,
case, yeah.
thank you. That's all I needed.
Any other, Arnold, if he's with us, am I wrong in thinking that typically you do not require these 5-foot high window sills or glazing for windows in staircases or bathrooms or hallways?
It depends on how big the windows are and what they're facing. So if you have a stairway facing the side with very large windows and looking right down into the neighbor's windows, then there would be obscure glazing required.
I've heard you tell me in the past that things like stairs and hallways where people are just moving through, not stopping and looking, you think is less of a privacy issue.
Less, but not necessarily always no privacy. Like there are situations where neighbors complain vehemently about, those type of conditions. So it's more of a case by case basis.
On a staircase,
Yes.
typically, because you have a mid-level landing, having a window sill height of 5 feet above the upper floor level becomes challenging. I guess in here you have
That,
a different thing here, right?
That would be 5 feet above the landing height. But I think that was previously in the standard, but I don't see that in the revised standard.
it is still there as point, C, yeah. In a stairway, the finished floor is the height of the landing. We can maybe rephrase that a little, but,
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that because when it says finished floor level, it doesn't say off the stair landing or some way to clarify that finished floor level is. of that
right, what it
landing, not-
currently says is windows. So, it's considered meeting privacy standards if the window has a sill above 5 feet from the finished floor level or in a stairway 5 feet above the height of the landing. Would be more clear than saying the finished floor is the height of the landing.
Okay, so Arnold, do you think the way this is written, not excluding stairs and hallways and bathrooms is the most appropriate interpretation of the IR standards right now?
I think the way it's written is pretty close to the IR standards right now. I think the only difference is when you talk about the distances to the yards. The IR standards doesn't have a specific, it's this distance. We talk about close proximity, but we don't have a specific number attached to that.
Okay,
I have the same concern with that. This one in particular, as 20 feet, like is the starting of this regulation, right? In a SB9 project, 20 feet side yard is
Huge.
probably just about never gonna
well, at the
happen.
Never
back of
gonna
the
happen.
property, it might. facing
Right,
the
but this
backyard.
also regulates the side, right? Side or rear lot side. So for like your concern about the stair window, would we change that to, or 10 feet in case of stairs, or some way to kind of allow a little bit more flexibility on stairs?
I think the way this is written is if you're less than 20 feet from the interior lot line, then this applies. If you're more than 20 feet from the interior lot line, then there are no restrictions. That's how
I see.
I read
That's not
this.
how I was reading it. Okay, thank you.
Although the zoning code, for a rear lot line, you can't put a second floor closer to 20 feet from the rear lot line based on the existing code. So this would basically have no restrictions facing a rear lot line is how this is written. You'd have to increase the distance along the rear lot line above 20 feet for this to apply in any situation.
And for a little more context, this is consistent with director's hearing interpretations when we've had neighbor concerns about privacy across rear property lines, that the 20-foot setback is a sufficient distance to not need, say, obscured glazing when facing the rear yard. And so we have, in this case, we're also applying that to side yards as a determination of when you don't need to do the 5-foot sills, which again are something that or obscured glazing, which is something that gets applied to the IRs regularly.
How about this very last sentence here? Seems to sneak in. This standard shall also apply to first floor windows when the finished floor is more than 2 feet above grade. Isn't that a departure from the IR standards right now?
It is a departure from the IR standards, but it's consistent with the ADU standards. The recently adopted ADU standards added that in due to, I think, neighborhood concerns about when the finished floor is elevated, particularly in flood zones, so that the 6 or 7 foot fence is perhaps no longer doing a sufficient job in providing privacy from first floors. But you are correct that that's not something that the IR program currently includes.
I can't tell you how many times I've been told if it's on the first floor, it's not regulated. We can do what we like. And that's regardless of the floor plate height.
And 2 feet seems very low to kind of jump into that requirement.
Again, this is taken from the ADU code.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to apply that to all houses in town now. I mean, it's basically many houses are 2 feet above the ground. And all of a sudden you just have no side windows on the house. Is that really the intent?
Perhaps there's a setback that would be cited. I mean, the ADUs can all be, what, 4 feet from the property line? Normal houses that aren't SB9 houses have to follow the regular setbacks, except for their light wells and such. So in the case of SB9, they can go as close as 4 feet, right? Yeah.
So, but this is, within 20 feet from the side lot, if I'm reading this correctly. So a house is going to be less than 20 feet from the side yard.
Almost
So this
always,
would
yeah.
require.
So my suggestion is to maybe focus this last sentence on when there's a 4-foot property setback or side setback that's proposed. Then maybe that could be an easy way to
Yeah, I think.
usher this a requirement in based on how we do it for ADUs. So it's a
Yeah, the
possibility.
intent was for first floor windows less than 20 feet away and elevated above grade.
This is under section B, 2-story houses. So would I be correct in interpreting that none of this applies if I'm building a single-story house?
This, again, was added as a part of acknowledging the change to the ADU code. So we may want to consider if we want to separate it into a different one for elevated 1-story houses overall.
I think the
Yes.
window requirement, this obscure window requirement on the first floor part is, I think what Peter's questioning is, should be consistent whether it's a single story or a 2-story house.
Yeah, I think it should be separated out, not be under 2 stories. And I think what Amy French just suggested makes a lot of sense. Get to an additional restriction on setback, say 4 feet, not 6. Then you trigger these things like you do with ADUs. I cannot
Yeah, got
support
it.
this level of restriction on a house with a 6-foot setback on the side yard on the ground floor windows.
So noted.
B12 is operable windows along the sideline. And my comment here myself again was, what if I have a double hung window? There's more than just sliding windows and casement windows.
Arnold, would you like to speak to this? I mean, it is something that we have been typically requiring on individual review projects.
Yes, this would allow double hung vertically sliding windows. This just restricts horizontally sliding windows.
And why is there any difference as far as privacy goes?
I think this horizontally sliding windows, when you're using obscure glazing, when the window's in the open position, it allows more view out than a vertically sliding window does. So we tended to look at casement windows as a open, if you hinge it on the side facing the street, it's more likely to still obscure the view into, say, the neighbor's windows or rear yard. And on the cases of horizontally sliding windows, you really don't have the advantage of the hinge window still having some functionality when it's in the open position. The vertically sliding windows, it does provide some constraint. You still get some view when the window's open, but usually the lower half of the window being open has less impact than the whole window would with a horizontally sliding window. And we've had this come up in back and forth discussions with neighbors in specific situations, which is informing kind of this language.
Okay, I'm good with that then. So
Yeah, so just so I understand, so a single or double hung window, which again, if the glazing is obscured, but you can open it and have full view is allowed, but horizontal sliding is not.
Yes,
Because if I'm sitting on a chair upstairs and open up a single hung or a double hung window, it's no different than sliding window. Am I understanding that correctly?
it usually has less of the obscure glazing gets, removed from the eyesight. So the horizontal sliding window, when it's in an open position, just excludes essentially the value of that obscure glazing 100%. With the casement and the vertically sliding window, at least you still have some obscure glazing there. So you could limit other window choices, or just say not have any restriction on window choices, but this seemed like a middle ground, and it's something that we've used in the past to limit impacts on neighbors when it's come up.
you're just weaving a fine line here, Sam. I don't know how to. This is what his experience says is the best way to do it. So,
Well, I think, Peter, what you were saying before is you start eliminating the vertically sliding windows too. You're eliminating a whole nother typology of window, and then you only allowing like hinged windows like casement windows. So that's
yeah, you don't want to do
even
that.
more restrictive. So
Yeah.
it's how do you find the balance between trying to minimize the impact without being overly restrictive? So this is the language that we thought would best achieve that. But if you have other ideas, that would be great.
Well,
Yeah, I want to comment, just add a window type here. The awning windows, if you open up an awning.
Board Member Hirsch, your microphone's not on.
If you open up an awning window, you can see the backyard of your neighbor. It gets very complex.
typically awning windows are very limited in how much they open.
Yeah.
I wrote down here a tilt turn window. It's not so popular now, but there's hardware that exists that lets you open a window either way. You might consider just using the word hinged window sash. That would encompass all of these things. But I think an awning window, you can't possibly open enough to make a privacy
You can see the
violation.
backyard of the neighboring house.
Oh, put it down.
Yeah, that's where the second floor, it's back. You see the backyard from the second floor.
I think my only issue with this is really like it's eliminating one window type, which, you open a sliding window, you're opening 50%. You're opening a single hung or a double hung, you're opening 50%,
50%.
right? It's, dependent on what you see depends on your height, how you're sitting, all of those things. So it doesn't feel like you're changing anything by just eliminating sliding window type, but it is more of a contemporary window type. So you're kind of eliminating architectural language rather than particular use. So that's my one concern with it. Thank you.
I would agree with that. It's sort of 50% and 50% seem equivalent. Now, of course, Peter brought up tilt and turns. And my one thing about that is that while that's a hinged window, you can open that thing 100 degrees, or 180 degrees to the inside of the house. So then you have the entire opening is wide open and there is no privacy. So at this point now, are we going to regulate tilt and turns that you can't have that? It just feels like we're over regulating the windows a bit. So.
Has this become much of an issue, really, the operable windows causing privacy issues?
We've had several appeals where that's been a case. I've stood in bathrooms pretending that I'm standing and looking, and yeah, that was an appeal based on which direction the window opened.
Is it common though, or is it the exception?
This is also written with the acknowledgement that there will potentially be a requirement for fire egress windows and that we can't, require like only fixed windows or something that would prevent adequate fire egress. So this is compromising those things.
Most of the time, most windows are closed in reality. So the amount of privacy impact to begin with is small. And I'm not sure we're just trying to make it too complicated by regulating the way a window functions at the same time. But I think it's important to be consistent with the process that we've used in the IR standards. And I guess what I come down to is this is what they recommend. The guy who does the IR standards, we should just stick with it.
Well, it comes up enough. I mean, it doesn't come up on every, situation, but it's come up on many situations. That's why it's here.
Yeah, I just can't think of another way to do it. That's subjective, objective. Let's move on. Side daylight plane clearance. Any questions? You're lowering the daylight plane measurement to 8 feet from 10 for side yards.
I'll just note that this kind of has been dealt with in previous discussion with the ARB about daylight planes. So, we can just forward those notes from the last time so that I'm hoping we can finish the B section and then maybe continue the Eichler till the meeting of December 21st, being that we have 2 ad hoc items. And I have an EOC drill at noon I'm supposed to be at.
I'm going to speak to this last one because it would severely impact my house. And I imagine it would severely impact a lot of houses to make that change. I don't know why it's necessary to make the change. It has 10 feet is the normal height in which you figure the daylight plane. Why can't we just live with it? Why are we reducing it?
Amy, so you're saying we have 20 minutes. Do we have to wrap up the meeting?
Well, I was suggesting maybe if we could finish the B section here, these last 2, with the note that we've already kind of had that full discussion about daylight plane, and we really just have this contextual roof pitch to deal with. It would be great to finish this portion, and then continue the Eichler portion until December 21st.
I think the board is willing to finish the whole thing today, but you're saying that we don't have that
Sure.
much time. with
I
staff?
just have a problem in that I'm the liaison, and we have 2 ad hoc items after this, and we can't do them simultaneously for reasons I can explain.
It's okay. I just want to know what the parameters are.
Just really quickly, I can say for B13, the side daylight plane clearance, the changes that we made to it were directly based on prior ARB feedback to not have a daylight plane plus a step back. It's also consistent with current IR interpretations that when adjacent to a single story house, we require them to be 10 feet, or sorry, I was reading and thinking at the same time, 2 feet below the current daylight plane. The rephrasing here, instead of saying be 2 feet under the daylight plane, was rearranged to say the daylight plane's measured from 8 feet instead of 10 feet.
I've noted to myself, this is okay with me. It's restrictive, but I think you're right. We've gone through it, and this was our compromise. I hear what you're saying, David.
I just don't agree with that.
Yeah.
In a tighter situation, you're going to eliminate square footage from some buildings.
I think people are entitled to go through a discretionary process instead if you want to be larger. When you're next to a single story house, you have a bigger impact.
Strangely enough, my house was built on the basis of a 10-foot daylight plane. Nobody objected.
Any other board member comments on this? So I think you're seeing 4 members with it okay, 1 member strongly objecting to it. So if you
Strongly, very strongly.
if you could note that, maybe do some.
Are you sure that others don't? Is that true?
Shall we have a straw poll on this?
Yeah.
Okay, to leave item B13, how would you like to change it, David? You would like to
10
strike?
feet, keep it the same.
So you would like to strike item B13?
Yeah, because it's ridiculous to 1-story houses then could be removed and they become 2-story houses.
So the poll is, do we remove item B13? Board member Hirsch says yes. Board member Rosenberg.
No, I just say that it retain the existing daylight plane.
Fair enough. Rephrase, that's the same thing as removing it, but fine, keep B13 so you have a 10-foot setback height beginnings in all cases. Board member Hirsch wants to do that. Board member Rosenberg is thinking about it. I do not want to do that. Board members Chen and Adcock, what do you think? Well, you're required to have an opinion on this, I'm sorry. That's your job here, so you have to help decide. Staff, we have discussed this in the past.
Yes, it was discussed at one of the 3 ARB meetings that happened in about June of this year.
Yeah,
And
so-
again, this is consistent with the prior direction.
I mean, I think the hard thing that we keep running into here is that we're not trying to be overly restrictive, but at the same time, we really want to preserve privacy for neighbors, right? You can imagine the situation where somebody comes in and builds a whole bunch of stuff 4 feet from your property line, 17 feet tall, and all of a sudden, instead of being in your nice single-family home, you feel like you're living next to an
Kendra,
apartment complex.
This isn't privacy. This is
Daylight
the
plane.
volume of a house.
And no, understood, but it has to do with the concept of somebody being so close to your property line and being so volume imposing. Now, do I think 2 feet is going to make or break a difference?
2 feet is significant in the daylight plan.
I mean, that's the thing, is that like, the reason that I'm still thinking about this and that I don't have a strong answer at this time, I do have an opinion, just not an answer. We're trying to balance 2 pretty complicated things. On one hand, I'm a big fan of daylight planes, and as long as you respect the daylight plane, move along. And the question is, if this is worth imposing extra restrictions because you have a single family home next to it, contextually, it's important, it's relevant. But at the same time, I also don't want to over restrict things either, because again, in the future, it could be built to something different. So I'm just still processing.
A thought on this is because it's off of the adjacent grade or average adjacent grade. And then in the previous item, we talked about the, 2 feet first floor. To David's point, it might even be reducing square footage on the first floor,
Might.
right? Because 8 feet with a 4-foot property, setback.
Yep.
Yeah, we had that happen once on a house in a flood zone where you're already up 3 or 4 feet.
Mhm.
We need to be straight. We've already told them once to do this. I'm hearing a lot of hesitation on this, and we got to decide at least what we think. So shall we?
Didn't like it then, don't like it now.
I'm sure you didn't like it then and don't like it now,
Mhm,
but there's 5
that's
of
right.
us. So what do we think?
What is the daylight plane angle?
45 degrees.
45?
It's 45 degrees. And this is something that we're already doing on our IR projects that are adjacent to single family houses.
I mean, so this would allow for a 10-foot plate height, right? If I'm doing my math right.
12-foot plate height. Right.
Well,
Um,
if it's 4 feet over
Or 12 feet
45
from-
degrees. So yeah, 4 feet up, you're right, 12-foot plate height. I would, at this point, vote to leave it alone as it's written.
Is there an exception for flood zone properties, the half the height increase? Does that apply in these things?
Not as it is currently written, again, with the IR projects. So I think there is a separate thing that spoke to that. But the way that the daylight plane is currently measured, there is 1/2 of the difference between the existing grade and the base flood elevation is an additional bump to the daylight plane.
Would that apply in this case?
I believe so.
It seems to me only fair that it does. And again, that's an established practice in Palo Alto.
We can add wording in there about the floodplain.
Yeah, I think it's important to do that at least. Okay, can we leave this if we add wording about the floodplain? I see you shaking your head. Yes, Musam. Board Member Chen?
Yes.
Elizabeth, yes. Malta, yes. Hirsch? Definitively no.
Absolutely no.
You've got the feedback from the board on this now. Okay, next item is contextual roof pitch. Who else feels this is wildly inappropriate?
Agreed. You should be allowed to follow daylight plane.
Yeah, just the daylight plane on this. Anybody else? I want to strike this altogether. Board Member Hirsch?
Yes, I want to
Yes.
strike it too.
Yeah, so we don't think that you should have any roof pitch regulation aside from the daylight plane.
noted, and this is something that would get revisited when we look at ones that are specifically in an EICLR context as a separate objective standard.
Absolutely, it's a separate thing. Okay, so staff, what I hear you advising us is that we close out our meeting now so we can get to the other things. We'll pick this
I
up
would
again.
request a vote to continue to take up all of the EICLR standards at the meeting of December 21st.
Quick question. So we covered section C last time. Did we cover D last time as well? Just wanna
Yes,
confirm
the
that. Okay,
only
perfect.
standards outstanding for comments are section E.
Perfect. Thank you.
So we're just on the ICO stuff.
So I will move to continue section E to date uncertain.
12/21.
I appreciate December 21st because we do have a date with council that
Perfect.
we're bumping up against.
To 12/21, then I would.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Can we have a vote, please? Roll call vote.
Board Member Adcock,
Yes.
Board Member Chen,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
No.
No?
No.
You don't want to continue this? You want to go through the EICLR stuff right now?
Just-
Is this
That's what we're voting on. We're voting on moving to continue the EICLR items until next meeting.
Doesn't.
That's all we're doing.
That's all we're voting
That's all
on?
we're voting on. It's just moving the EICLR items discussion till next
Okay,
meeting.
fine. Thank you. I'll
So is that a
agree.
yes?
Agree with that.
Vice Chair Rosenberg,
Yes.
Chair Balte,
Yes,
motion carries.
thank you. Next item is minutes. Do we have a motion for the minutes from October 19th?
No, there's no minutes.
No minutes.
There are no
Oh.
minutes on the agenda.
I'm looking at the last month's agenda. Here we go.
Business, you can adjourn so we can go to the ad hoc.
Yeah, so we don't have any board member questions, comments, or announcements, do we? So let's adjourn this right now. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll go into an ad